Now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from ISS National Laboratories, the Public Affairs and Outreach Lead, Mr. Patrick O'Neill.
Well, good morning. How's everyone doing? Awesome. Well, welcome to the 11th Annual International Space Station Research and Development Conference. It's fantastic to be here in person, which obviously is something that we have not had the chance to do for the last couple of years. So while we are here, part of this conference obviously is for us to talk about the great things that are happening on the space station, how it is that it's contributing to benefiting science, how it's contributing towards furthering business models in low Earth orbit, and ultimately how it is that we are just ultimately benefiting humanity. Okay, so again, the world has seen a lot of dramatic change, and again, I think one of the things we want to focus on during this conference is to also highlight a lot of the change that has been happening in the last couple of years since we have been in person since 2019. And so this conference, again, is really going to showcase a lot of the great things that have happened in the space community during that time frame. Sorry, I'm trying to read my teleprompter simultaneously. So the conference theme is Decade of Results. And I'm going to go on a limb and assume that over the course of this week, we're going to hear again and again the importance of the types of science that's happening on the space station and how that ultimately leads to applied applications that can bring value to our nation, as well as, again, enabling robust markets in low Earth orbit. So, again, it's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of great conversations, and we're going to start it off really with a bang here today, too. So, again, really excited to be here with you all. I did mention that while I am a host, there is another host, too. So hosts implies plural, which means that I will have the opportunity to introduce a lot of the sessions and be with you over the course of the week alongside my partner in crime, which will be Jennifer Scott Williams. So please, Jennifer, you want to come on up?
Hey, Patrick.
Good morning.
Good morning, Patrick, and good morning to all of you. It is such a pleasure to be here with you this morning. Again, Jennifer Scott Williams, and I have the joy of managing the Applications Client Support Office at NASA's Johnson Space Center. And man, we're here in person to celebrate the impact of humankind's greatest technological achievement, technological and international collaboration, the International Space Station. So it's great to see everybody here. And like Patrick said, I'm looking forward to the rest of the week, connecting with old friends and colleagues and making new connections and learning more about how space-based research is advancing the footprint of human presence in low Earth orbit and beyond.
Agreed 100%. And so this is obviously, you've done this before. Now, granted, you've done it in more of a virtual setting, but one of the things that I always remember the first two times when you were doing it virtually is that you had a special guest that was able to join you. Are you going to be having another special guest like your son join you this year?
Well, you know, he's not here today in person, but I don't know. We'll see. He might show up on STEM Day, so y'all be on the lookout for him. He's going to look a little bit like me, although, of course, I'm a little bit better looking. But he just might show up, so be on the lookout for that. What I do know for sure is we do have someone in the house that we're about to bring on stage, Mr. Ray Lugo. So, Ray Lugo, he serves as the Chief Executive Officer and Principal Investigator for the International Space Station National Laboratory. He is the manager for the Center for the Advancement of Science in Space, Incorporated, CASIS, and he manages the ISS National Lab. In this role, Lugo is responsible for implementing strategic objectives that enable space-based research through the International Space Station National Lab that bring value to our nation and builds a robust and sustainable market in low Earth orbit. Welcome, Ray.
Well, thank you. I tell you, when people introduce you like that, it kind of takes you I don't know. That and $5 will buy you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So, welcome here today to the ISSRDC. It's been a long time coming. A lot of people did a lot of hard work getting us here. I want to thank Jennifer and Patrick. I obviously need to buy a pair of shoes like Jennifer's got. I'm not sure I can pull it off as well as she did, but they're I love the color. So I want you to know that this is actually my first ISSRDC. I don't know anybody else. Anybody else here for the first time? Wow, so great. And it's the first in-person conference we've had since 2019, so it's important. While we were in the throes of COVID-19, I think it was late last year, I joined the team at Gatens, and little did I know what a wild ride it would be. We've built a great partnership with NASA, Joel and Robyn and Ryan and the rest of the chickens have been great to work with. It's been an incredible opportunity, and I think we are really building a relationship that's going to lead to a lot of great things. The theme this year is a decade of results. I'm not going to take credit for that moniker. That's Robyn Gatens' term, but I think it's entirely appropriate. We've got about another 10 years on the space station program, and we need to squeeze all the juice out of it that we can. So, we're learning from everything we do. We're working together with our commercial service providers. I think folks know that we've set up a UAC. I think a lot of things are going on well. But I want to acknowledge our ISSRDC sponsors. Without their generous contributions and large checks, I don't think we'd be here today. Boeing, joining us again as the platinum sponsor, is a consistent supporter and collaborator of many of the ISS National Lab's efforts, not just this conference. We also work together on education and outreach with Genes in Space and to support startups that fuel our LEO economy with the Mass Challenge Accelerator Program. Boeing has worked hand in hand with NASA on ISS from the start. In fact, I spent the better part of a year at a little building at JSC negotiating a contract with Boeing at that time. Its engineers and spaceflight specialists have had a large hand in the success of the station every day. It's a credit to the team that the astronauts have no qualms going up to ISS months at a time because they have faith in the spacecraft and the support they receive from Earth. So thank you very much, John and the Boeing Company. Our gold sponsor this year is Orbital Reef. For those of you who don't know it, we are going to build a reef in space. Hopefully we'll have lots of fish and places to go. But our thanks also go to our silver sponsors, Airbus, KBR, Leidos, Northrop Grumman, and Redwire. And of course, I want to thank all of our generous marketplace sponsors. This outstanding group of sponsors represents both long-standing as well as newer collaborations and partnerships to make the ISS National Lab the dynamic locus of a truly robust and growing LEO economy. Wow, that's a mouthful. Please be sure to visit them in the exhibit hall. And I can tell you the exhibit hall is pretty impressive. We're thinking a lot about the decade of results and what that means to us and what's next. We're working together to support the ever-changing LEO economy and advances in science and amazing R&D that comes back to Earth. So much work takes place after the launch returns. We are seeing publications based on space-based research that others are using as a basis for their research solicitations. Multi-year funding opportunities with long-term partners like National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation are building on research and fine-tuning objectives to answer the tough questions. As we continue our work together, I invite you to think creatively and collaboratively about the work that lies ahead. This is our 11th ISSRDC conference, a testament not only to the fantastic work everyone in this room has a part in, but meaningful stepping stones that we've been laying down to advance R&D that impacts our lives. Many of the staff from Gatens have been here for quite some time. Actually, quite a long time, moving the needles to speak, laying down those stepping stones. So I'd like to take a moment to recognize several milestone anniversaries. We have 2 staff members here today celebrating 10 years with Gatens. Robbie Hampton, where are you? Robbie? So Robbie Hampton and our MC this morning, Patrick O'Neill, both have completed 10 years at CASIS, which is not a trivial feat. So thank you, Patrick and Robbie, for your dedication to this organization and its mission. The successes we've had are in no small part due to your hard work. We appreciate the skills and knowledge you continually bring to the job, and it's fair to say we wouldn't be who we are without your contributions. So thank you very much. And we wouldn't be here where we are without the contributions of many of you here in the audience. Researchers, payload developers, and operators, launch providers, and so many others. I ask all of you over the next few days of this conference to not only celebrate the accomplishments we've achieved together, but to think about what we can do together to make the next decade of scientific research and technology development one that historians will point to as a major turning point in the history of humans. It is a big challenge, but one I know we can rise to. It will be my privilege to work alongside all of you as we do so. So now, I'd like to introduce Joel Montalbano, NASA ISS Program Manager. He's the guy responsible for the overall management of the program. He's led development and operations of the ISS. So with that, please let's give Joel a big welcome.
Thank you, thanks. Well, welcome again. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Yesterday we kicked it off with a workshop, the In-Space workshop, and I told people when I started that we have the coolest jobs in the world, and I really believe that. Working on human space flight, having the International Space Station over 20 years, and what we do on the International Space Station is by far the coolest thing that I can think of, right? You wake up every day, you're excited to go to work, you're excited to do what you do every day, you're excited to work with people, you work domestically, you work internationally. It is just, like I said, one of the coolest things we do. So just a huge thank you for everybody for coming out to this conference. As Ray's talked to you, it's been a while since we got together, and I know it's an effort for people to travel, to come talk to us, to come taking time away from your day-to-day work and come to the conference. A couple things as you go through the conference, what we're looking for today, especially for the first time people that are visiting, we want to know on Space Station what works. We want to know if we're doing something that's helping you guys, tell us that. If we're doing something that doesn't work, we need to know that too. We need to know the stuff that you want to do on Space Station. So if there's something that you see, hey, I really want to do this, but you don't have that capability, we want to know that. You have two Italians, Ray and myself. We grew up with crazy, right? So bring crazy ideas to us. Let us take those, and we can do stuff on Space Station. We can lean forward. We can do things that people think, I'm not going to bring it up because I don't think they can do that. Well, that's crap. Tell us. Give us the opportunity to use the Space Station. We got a decade, on December 31st, we got approved by the White House to go to 2030 on board the International Space Station. How cool is that? So, we got some work to do to get that in the legislation. We got some work to do with the international partners, but we're moving forward. And my plan as the program manager is we're running and gunning, right? We're going to go to 2030 full up. We're not going to slow down in 27 to get to 2030. We're going to go full bore to 2030. So anybody thinks that there's a different plan, you're wrong. We're going to 2030. We're strong. We're going to have the partnership with us. The partnership's got some struggles, as everybody's well aware, but we're working through those, right? I can tell you the partnership is strong. Talking to my international partners. In fact, I was in Moscow last week. You may have read that we signed an integrated crew agreement with our Russian colleagues to fly on one SpaceX and one Soyuz per year this year, 23 and 24. Once the Boeing vehicle gets flying, we'll add that Boeing agreement and we'll have the integrated crew on all our vehicles. So we're working hard. We're working with our Our European partners, they have a ministerial that's happening this December. Well, they'll be talking about the extension to 2030. Our JAXA colleagues are working on extension, our Canadian colleagues. So together, the partnership is moving towards 2030. You know, a couple things on COVID. Just some reminders for you guys as you're at the conference. I know you're excited to see everybody, and that's awesome. Just be mindful of the COVID. You know, we have masks available if people want masks. We have hand sanitizer. We have some testing kits. If somebody feels sick, just go ahead and reach out to one of your sponsors, and we'll get you a testing kit, bring it to your room. And so we do not want to turn this into a super spreader event. And so we ask that you exercise caution in that. But don't let that stop you communicating. I mean, that's the reason why we're together. We're here together to go do that. You know, over these last few years during the pandemic, just a couple things that we've done. Space station hadn't stopped, as you guys are well aware. We've flown up over 15,000 kilograms of utilization and research hardware. We've returned over 6,500 kilograms. We've done over 6,000 crew-tended utilization and research, and that's just the crew-tended. You know, forget about all the stuff we do that's remote, all the stuff that's ground commanded, the work that's done out of the Marshall Space Flight Center to keep all our external payloads, our everything, our internal payloads, the work that we're doing across the agency. You know, we have participation of onboard the International Space Station of every center and NASA headquarters. And that's just the government part of NASA. You know, we have other government agencies participating. We have a huge domestic following on board the International Space Station. And then you move over to the international. And the beauty of what we're doing on board today, what we're doing in the United States, trying to develop the commercial markets, is we're sharing our lessons learned with our international partners. And with that, and the work that CASIS is doing on board the International Space Station. You know, I think everybody's well aware, by law, we owe, through the CASIS work, 50% of all the resources. So that's 50% up mass, 50% down mass, crew time, power, data, you name it. And working with the CASIS team, we're exceeding that. There's more stuff that we're getting through the CASIS that we can operate on board space station. So that's a huge success, and it's due to people in this room, but we can do more, right? We got, you know, through the end of the decade, and we need to maximize the use of the International Space Station. So again, huge thanks. Thank you for coming here. Let me hand it over to John.
Actually, before we hear from John, we're going to actually play a video real quick because Boeing is the platinum sponsor, and they have a lovely video that they're going to showcase for us, and then we'll go from there.
propulsion. Go. Hydraulic. Go. Pneumatic. Go. Go Atlas.
Go Centaur.
Go Starliner.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And liftoff. Starliner is headed back to space on the shoulders of Atlas, powered by a workforce dedicated to its success.
We had the privilege and the honor of watching Starliner arrive. It was really spectacular to see this beautiful vehicle arrive. This is a momentous day in NASA's history and just paving the way for the future as we start enabling commercial flights here in low Earth orbit while NASA pivots to the moon and eventually onto Mars.
The journey has been hard, but the reward is what we see today as our teams work together to meet the promise of advancement offered in low Earth orbit. This connection is the first of many that will continue for years to come. No one goes to space alone, and we can all benefit from the efforts involved.
Undocking complete.
A little sad to see her go, but looks like a successful mission so far. Godspeed, Starliner.
And touchdown, Starliner. We're touching down in the desert of New Mexico, marking the completion of Orbital Flight Test 2. And that touchdown coming at 5:49 p.m. Central Time, almost exactly 6 days into the mission.
Oh my. I mean, we all tracked towards from the beginning, from launch all the way through the mission, and this is what we were hoping for at the end, right? I mean, a soft, safe landing, culmination of all the hard work. I mean, you've got to give a huge congratulations to the folks at Boeing. Well, you couldn't ask for more.
Hey, thank you. And thank you, Ray, Joel, and Patrick. And again, welcome to everybody. Thank you guys so much for joining us at the conference today. You know, we're having a great year in human spaceflight. We added 2 solar arrays to the International Space Station. They'll be joined by 2 more this year and 2 more the following year. You saw the Starliner dock with the ISS, setting the stage for crew flight tests later this year and achieving the unlike domestic redundancy that's so important to the ISS mission. And in a month, we'll see an Artemis 1 mission with a human-rated spacecraft once again flying around the moon. Yet together with NASA and our industry colleagues, we see the expansion of capabilities and destinations year over year through at least the next decade. But this conference is the highlight for the International Space Station program as it focuses on the main thing, the cutting-edge microgravity research that you guys perform every day. Boeing's enormously proud of the work that we do with NASA to operate the ISS. The station is the crown jewel of the World Space Program and is in its prime, producing twice the amount of science every day than it did just 10 years ago. We have more cancer treatments in test. The station is performing research such as producing retinas and a steady effort that we have underway to improve the sensors that not only look back at the Earth, but also deep into space. And we're expanding our researchers every day as well. And part of that access to diverse users includes a program that we're very proud of at Boeing, the Genes in Space program. Boeing founded this effort more than 10 years ago, and the 9th Genes in Space experiment was just launched 2 weeks ago to the ISS. Genes in Space is a competition for high school students to come up with cellular-level research that advances human spaceflight by deciphering the challenges that face astronauts. During this conference, we'll name the winner of the 10th edition of Genes in Space. Though Boeing founded and sponsors Genes in Space, we don't do it alone. We have amazing partners in the company Mini PCR and Sebastian and Ray and the ISS National Lab. The ISS helps us look at the universe, sees the Earth with specialized sensors, and of course, learns vast knowledge about materials, biology, and physiology that only research in microgravity can uncover. Virtually all of that research applies back on Earth as well. And while the ISS remains in its prime, we continue to look to the future to ensure the capability to perform this vital research in LEO remains intact through our lifetime. We're excited to be part of the Orbital Reef team. It's all very exciting and just what the nation needs to meet the goal of a dynamic and valuable economy in low Earth orbit. That path is already being carved out today by the International Space Station. I think you'll also see that the space station has a long life ahead, continuing to perform and expand the capabilities for research and also adapting and setting the stage for a more commercial environment in the future. NASA has already selected privately made modules to join the ISS and is showing itself to be open to wider access as the commercial market matures. These investments are truly a sign of confidence in the mission taking place above us. And speaking of the mission taking place above us, it's my pleasure to introduce you to a couple of astronauts who are working aboard the International Space Station right now. Jessica Watkins was part of the 2017 astronaut class and has worked at NASA Ames and JPL and was a science collaborator for the Mars Curiosity rover. She is currently serving as a mission specialist on ISS. And Kjell Lindgren is a medical doctor, board certified in emergency medicine. He joined NASA in 2009 and served as deputy crew surgeon for STS-130 and Expedition 24. Dr. Lindgren flew on Expedition 44-45 and logged approximately 200 days in space. He participated in 2 spacewalks and in more than 100 different science experiments. Jessica and Kjell have been busy carrying out science on the ISS as part of NASA's SpaceX Crew 4 mission. First, I'd like you to join me in welcoming to the stage our moderator for our opening keynote session, David Kearney. Many of you might have seen David during Discovery Channel's Space Launch Live broadcast for crewed missions from the Kennedy Space Center. David and his team provided incredible commentary on these critical missions. He also writes for Full Throttle on the dramatic shifts in transportation and is also a former ABC News correspondent. Over to you, David. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. We are going to have a great morning here. We've got a great session. I'm so excited to be here. When they asked me, I've had a long relationship with the International Space Station. In fact, it was 1988 that I had my first exposure. And you say there was no space station in 1988, and that's true. I was doing return to flight, covering Boeing and Houston, Huntsville, and the Cape, and in Huntsville I saw one of the first mock-ups of the space station. So it's been fantastic to see it grow, visited in the mock-up in Building 9, and the VR experience of going to the station is about as close as I think I'm probably ever going to get. But I'm very excited to be here. We've got a couple of guests that we're going to speak to here, and then we're going to speak to our astronauts. I'm just going to introduce you very quickly to our 2 guests. Chris Owen is the founder and CEO of Voxa, which is based in Seattle. Has built an electron microscope that is on station right now. And Oren Milstein is the CEO of STEMRAD, which has built a, what would you call it? A vest, a protective vest to keep the ions and try and keep some of our astronauts from getting cancer. I'm looking at my watch because we're going to start this downlink in a couple of minutes, so I'm going to give you each 30 seconds. Chris, you put your microscope on station. What have you learned? What is the advantage of having something so small? You took something big and made it really small on station.
Well, the vastness of space is filled with tiny things, and these things we need to know what they're made of and what they look like because they affect us significantly. And so what we've been able to do is to analyze these things in space instead of having to bring them back to Earth and make decisions real time in situ, which enables new types of science and enhances our exploration greatly.
And Oren, this vest, you've already tested it once, you're iterating on it, basically trying to keep astronauts from getting cancer.
You know, that's correct, and the vest is meant for deep space, but I think the best proving ground for us as far as the ergonomics go are here in low Earth orbit. So that's what we're doing on ISS to confirm the ergonomic capabilities of the vest. And then to confirm the protective quality of the vest, we're sending it up on Artemis 1 at the end of August. So between the 2 studies, we're going to have a very profound understanding of the capabilities of the vest.
That's very exciting. We are just a moment away from our downlink with the two astronauts. I have to tell you, the first time, and these two gentlemen have been able to talk to astronauts in space as they're working the research on their experiments and their equipment. I've done it several times. It never gets old. I'm really looking forward to talking to these guys. Unfortunately, I am a news guy, and so when there is news, we have to talk about it. And Joel just mentioned, Montalbano mentioned that they've extended to 2030. The Russians have signed. Of course, the Russians just made a little bit of news. I'm sure you've all heard that they are planning to do their own station sometime after 2024. So that's something we'll be talking about as we go through the day today with leadership, and we'll ask our astronauts as well. One thing that I would like to say before we start, and I don't know if I'll get a chance to mention to Kjell Lindgren, who's in space right now, is that I asked him right before they launched, if you look at the crew photo, everybody's smiling, but Kjell has got this straight face. And I asked him, what was that all about? And he thought it was the best looking picture that he had, so that's the one he used. He may be listening now. Maybe I should make out the call here and see if we can bring them into the conversation. Station, this is David Curley from the Discovery Channel at the ISSRDC conference. How do you hear us?
Hello, we hear you loud and clear. How us?
Thank you, Jessica. Kjell, I was just telling the story about your straight face in the crew photo. There's the big smile. I just wanted to see it before we started here.
Yeah, if I had known that we were going to talk about that, I would have started out much more stony-faced. So,
well, we're here to talk about research and science. You've done a lot, and we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts of that. But as I mentioned, and I don't know if you heard, there was some news today that the Russians, even though NASA has extended to 2030 with Russians as their international partners, and as Montalbano said, they've been very good partners, that they are going to go ahead and do their own space station after 2024, sometime afterwards. It's been very controversial for the last 6 months. We saw a flag up on the station being held by your commander. Just give us a sense of what it's like in station now with your international partners, specifically the Russians.
yeah, that's a good question. And as to the news, that is very recent news, and so we haven't heard anything officially. Of course, we were trained to do a mission up here, and that mission is one that requires the whole crew. And so we continue to work every day to conduct the science and research that we've been trained to conduct, and that principal investigators from all over the world have invested their time and effort in. And it's a privilege to be able to do that. And so as a crew, we continue to work towards mission success, and that is everybody working together to make sure that we're accomplishing the science and keeping the crew and the vehicle safe.
All right, let's talk about science and research. You're both involved in a lot of experiments. All of you are. It's part of the astronaut's job on the station. Give me a sense of what your daily routine is. I mean, you have to take care of yourself and eat, and you have to take care of the station. How much time a day are you spending on experiments?
Yeah, it's a good question. And ultimately, every day is different up here, which is one of the privileges of getting up here, is that we have so many different things that we can do, so many cookie jars that we get to stick our hands in. But especially with the arrival of SpaceX 25 last week, as you know, we have a ton of science that we have up here that we get to participate in. So lately, the past week or so, it has definitely been heavier on the science side and less so on the maintenance side. We took care of some of the more kind of outstanding maintenance tasks prior to SpaceX 25 arriving to help clear our schedule so that we could really dig in to all the exciting science that was on board. So every day we get to participate in a new experiment or continue an experiment that we worked on earlier, and it has been really awesome to get to participate and support all the different science experiments up here.
Let's talk a little bit about, you do talk to the scientists on the ground when you're doing some of these experiments. Do you see this as building blocks? Do you see the bigger picture of one element that you're working on, that small experiment or whatever experiment, could mean something much bigger down the road for humanity.
You know, I think that during my last mission in 2015 and now, I really feel like we're bridge builders, and we are really part of the team that is building that bridge to return to the moon and then ultimately to make our way to Mars. And from the smallest experiment that we see up here to the more kind of milestone experiments, you really do get a sense that all of these are on that roadmap to enable us to do that deep space exploration, these longer missions further away from the Earth, to conduct science and exploration on the moon and to do the same on Mars. There's a whole suite of science that I think we'll have the opportunity to talk about. MOCHI, a small electron microscope. We have X-Root sitting in our vegetable enclosure that potentially can help provide part of our food system and maybe even part of our environmental control system. Have a glove box way down in the Japanese experiment module where we're conducting biological research to better understand the effects of radiation and the microgravity environment on different biological models. And then we're the subject of study also to understand the effects that long-duration space flight has on the human body. And so we really see all of these smaller pieces as bricks that are helping to build that bridge to the future.
Right. I think there are two
and
elements.
I would just add on.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, sorry. No, I just absolutely agree with Kjell, and just would add too that a lot of the science that we're doing here on station also has tremendous benefits for humanity back on Earth. A lot of what we are doing here, the technology that we're demonstrating, the science that we are producing, or helping to facilitate and support, it has applications to directly to making life better for humans on Earth right now. One example is the EMIT project. That's the Earth Surface Mineral Dust Source Investigation. You can check me on that. But it is an external payload that came in the trunk of Dragon, and that has been extracted to use spectroscopy to look at dust in the atmosphere, and using that to determine the mineral composition of dust so that we can understand the effect of dust on the Earth's climate and environment. Which obviously has direct impact to all of Earth's inhabitants. So a lot of what we're doing up here is, as Kjell mentioned, a bridge to the future as well as to the present.
Well, you guys are professional. You just did what I was going to say, Jessica. Thank you very much. And you did it much more eloquently than I could have, that the fact that deep space and then bringing some of this down here to Earth. And Kjell, you made a perfect segue. You talked about one of the experiments there, the MOCHI, which is Chris Owen's invention and is up on station. Chris, you have the floor to talk to our astronauts.
Sure. Well, thanks for joining us, Kjell and Jessica. Really appreciate what you guys do up there for payload science and for research. So I have a question for you. So we just finished our technology demonstration with MOCHI. And Jessica, you also took part in the NEMO mission off the coast of Florida underwater for technology demonstration and preparation as well. So my question for you is, after technology demonstration, because we're going to be transitioning into providing the service for the greater community for R&D and engineering development on ISS, how is technology demonstration different from other types of experiments in space, maybe more routine ones, and what are the differences in terms of how you guys perceive it on orbit, and finally, which one's more fun?
Well, as a scientist speaking to an engineer, I won't answer your last question. But no, absolutely.
They're all fun.
The thing that's so exciting and fun about doing tests and doing technology, looking at demonstrating technology and even the troubleshooting that comes with technology is that being able to use the ISS as a test bed. You know, this is one of the main purposes and one of the main benefits of the ISS is that we are able to use it to test technologies so that we can use them as we explore further out into the solar system. And you brought up NEMO, which is an interesting parallel as well, because NEMO is also a test bed. It was a test bed in order to fly MOCHI and other instruments onto ISS, where it can then function as a test bed here to then allow us to apply that to future exploration missions in the future. So it is a very neat lineage to be able to kind of work through those procedures, as you mentioned, as well as the equipment itself to get it fully ready to go when we need it.
Jessica, thank you very much. Now, Oren Milstein, your ASTRAD vest, which has been on station, the floor is yours.
No, thank you, David. So first of all, thank you to the dear crew members who participated in the ASTRAD study. It's been a couple of years. We've had 4 NASA crew members participate and 1 private Axiom 1 crew member participate. So we basically built this vest to protect the crew. So their involvement meant a lot to us. The feedback that we got is going to enable us to improve the ergonomics to a great extent, and there is great overlap between the feedback that we got from the different crew. And to that extent, I'm happy that we got very good information. And for my question, I'd just like to ask, having spent so much time on ISS already, how does it feel like to have possibly the opportunity to go to the moon? And are you more excited or more afraid about doing that? And if you're afraid or concerned, is there any kind of technology that you feel has yet to be developed for you to be able to safely venture to the moon and back?
Well, I think I certainly can speak for myself, and we've talked about the future of lunar exploration and Martian exploration, and so I think that I speak for my crewmates as well, is that we are really excited about Artemis and the exploration that represents. I think that we are all inspired by the images of the Apollo astronauts exploring the moon. I know Wadi is super excited about doing geology on the moon, and so I think that it's an exciting future for NASA and for all of our Artemis partners. It is certainly beyond low Earth orbit, and so that means some additional risk. But I am confident in the engineers and scientists and the team that is working out that architecture and plan is going to provide us, a safe and very fruitful plan for exploration. Now, the ASTRAD vest as an example, I think this is something that specifically addresses a risk that is a concern during that extra Earth or outside of this Earth's sphere of influence. Here in the ISS, we are still under the Van Allen belts. We have some protection from solar particle radiation and galactic cosmic radiation. But once we venture out of Earth's kind of geomagnetic protection and venture to the moon and then on to Mars, we are exposed to increased radiation, specifically the threat of these occasional solar particle events. And so having some type of protection that will afford us an extra layer of mitigation against acute effects of radiation and then the longer types of effects of radiation, I think is something that is very important. And so again, it's really a privilege to get to try out these technologies here on the space station, and then also to have input, to provide user input into it so that the product, whatever it is that we use in the future, is something that the crew members are going to be interested and excited about using.
I think that's part of it, is the feedback that you get from the astronauts that helps develop the technology to the next iteration that makes it, in your case, more comfortable to wear.
Very important, yeah, because a solar particle event can last up to 2 weeks.
Right.
So it must be comfortable, and they must be able to continue operations. That's the purpose of the vest.
Oren, thank you. All right, guys, let's talk a little bit about station. And Jessica, I want to start with you. I think we all may dream or think, especially anybody who's been in the mock-ups in Building 9 in Houston, of what it's going to be like on the station. But when you came into the station, what struck you the most? Was it the smells, the sound? Give me a sense of where your mind was and what you've actually experienced at the beginning and throughout your stay so far.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the mock-ups in Building 9 and across JSC and our other centers as well, in Hawthorne and SpaceX and Hawthorne. Because our training facilities and instructors are so top-notch, when we arrive, it actually all feels very familiar. Everything that we are interacting with, the modules that we are learning to float in, it all feels very familiar because we have done the training. But at the same time, it is equally as unfamiliar. It is the most unfamiliar environment that we can find ourselves in. And so that kind of juxtaposition of the familiar and the unfamiliar was really kind of surprising, and kind of took some time to really find a way to mesh those two to a point where now it feels like home.
Kjell, you flew in 2017. You had a very experienced mentor. You are now the veteran. You are now the mentor. Tell me about that relationship and what has changed on station, and give me a sense from the research and development area for the folks in this room about how it's changed and may help them continuing into the next several years.
Yeah, it is such a privilege to get to do this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity again. And I had an extraordinary experience my first time, and really, for me, my goal was to be able to try and help Wadi and Farmer first-time flyers have that same extraordinary experience. And so really a delight to provide some advice along the way. Honestly, both Farmer and Wadi have not needed any. They are natural flyers and have really taken to this environment. And it's been fun to watch them can I be masters of activities here on station. In terms of the difference, I think that part of it, the crew, is a huge difference. I had an amazing crew the first time around and an amazing crew this time, but the crew really makes the mission, and so it's such a privilege to get to fly with these guys. The second part of it is that you really feel at station, the science at station, and so especially with the arrival of SpaceX 25, we are filled to the brim with science. There's science happening in all nooks and crannies of station. You really feel like we are up and running and providing that vital test bed for extending our reach in the solar system and improving life back on Earth. And so very, very grateful to the teams that each of these projects represent. And so we appreciate the teams, the principal investigators, and everybody that's really facilitated getting this science up here so that we can do the work together. We know that each of these experiments represents maybe a career or a lifetime's worth of work. And so we certainly, every time that we're touching one of these experiments, we understand the gravity of that work, and it's a privilege to be a part of it.
Another great segue. Let's talk about cooperation. JAXA is here. I think ESA is here someplace. You're dealing with experiments from international partners. Talk about that cooperation. It is an international space station. And Jessica, before we run out of time, as a scientist, tell me about doing science there.
Yeah, absolutely. The international cooperation piece of the International Space Station is truly at the center of it. It is such an amazing example of what we can do when we all come together. We pool our resources and expertise to really accomplish things that we would not be able to accomplish on our own as individual nations. So to be able to be a part of that, even just within our crew, with having Samantha Cristoforetti, an ESA astronaut, with us, as well as our Russian colleagues, and then to have the teams on the ground, as Kjell was mentioning, that support us day in and day out, is just absolutely amazing. And we're super excited as well about the opportunity to in the future have our first Arab astronaut long duration mission that was recently announced. So grateful to have them to be part of the team as well. So it is truly an international endeavor, and the cooperation is what makes the whole system work. As a scientist, it is just the most exciting place to be here on Space Station. And as a geologist in particular, being able to look out the window, see the Earth from a planetary perspective, and really be able to use that unique view to marry kind of what we are able to observe on the ground, on foot, as with kind of the more remote sensing perspective that we can get from the ISS. It's just a really unique opportunity. So super grateful for the opportunity.
The theme of the conference is decade of results. I think we have just a few seconds. Kjell, give us a sense of what you think you're contributing to the next less than decade of results.
Well, yeah, I think we've been at work for over 2 decades now, and I think that we have the privilege of seeing the space station operating at its intended capacity. We have hundreds of research experiments up here, and it is building on the work that has been done over previous decades, and so it's exciting to be a part of that. And to really see the foundation that this is building for future exploration and for improving life back on Earth. And again, grateful for all of our partners across the world, universities and industry that are investing in this platform to help us succeed.
Kjell and Jessica, thanks so much for taking some time to talk to the conference. Everybody, anything you want to say to Kjell and Jessica? Thank you very much.
Station. This is Houston ACR. That concludes the event.
Cool. Oh, we almost got the entire flip. We only got part of the flip. Chris and Oren, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Always, it's just kind of a charge to be able to talk to somebody in space.
It's exciting.
Thanks again very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We've talked a lot about science, and we will continue to talk about that. I would now like to bring on the stage the leaders from NASA and ISS National Lab who guide this truly collaborative spirit and work and research goals. Please welcome Ray Lugo, the CEO of the ISS National Laboratory, John Montalbano, who is the ISS Program Manager, and joining them is Robyn Gatens, Director of ISS in the Space Operations Mission Directorate of NASA. As the ISS Director, Gatens leads strategy, policy, integration, and stakeholder engagement for the station program at the agency level, including the use of station for research and technology demonstrations, including to support NASA's Artemis missions. Thank you all for coming. Robyn, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you too.
I think we've got to start with the extension that Joel outlined and the partnership with the Russians, and we all know that everything was coming to an end at 2030. Is this much of a development today with the Russians saying they want to develop their own station sometime after 2024?
I think the Russians, just like us, are thinking ahead to what's next for them. And as we're planning for transition after 2030 to commercially owned and operated space stations in low Earth orbit, they have a similar plan. And so they're thinking about that transition as well. So we haven't received any official word from the partner as to the news today, and so we'll be talking more about their plan going forward.
In the past several months, in talking with several members of the leadership of NASA, the Russians have been good partners. I don't know that do you want the relationship to end?
No, absolutely not. They have been good partners, as all of our partners are, and we want to continue together as the partnership to continue operating space station through the decade.
Well, let's talk about the decade of results. You've had some good success.
Yes, we have. And what we mean by the decade of results, of course, we've been getting results all along from the space station. The first decade was really about assembly and completing the space station. And then we started to learn how to use it and how to expand utilization of this incredible platform. So now looking ahead to 2030, you know, I guess I did come up with the moniker Decade of Results. It's really to drive home, you know, trying to get, as Ray said, all the juice, all the benefits out of this incredible platform, while we are planning for transition to what comes next in low Earth orbit with commercial space stations.
That's something that we want to talk about next, or coming up. Joel, the station has been up there a long time. You're going to get another 8 years out of it. Is it up to the task?
Absolutely. You know, we talk about, you know, what upgrades we're doing. We are in the process of upgrading 6 of the 8 solar arrays. 2 went up, as John Mulholland talked earlier, last year. We got another 2 going up this year, and then 2 next year. We just put on the NanoRacks airlock, and so adding capability. You know, we are looking at space station. You know, what really drives your lifetime of space station is your day-night cycles. And the teams are looking at it, and, you know, we'll be ready to go to 2030, and if somebody asks us to go a little longer, I'm going to put a smile on your face and say we can go do that.
Well, you're making your own news today as well. I mentioned to you before we came on, your spreadsheet 10 years ago versus today must be filled. There's so much more activity, so many more launches, so many more flights, so many more experiments.
Yeah, it's been a busy time. You know, with the, you know, just recently we did the Axiom 1 mission, the first U.S. private astronaut mission where Axiom Space flew 4 commercial astronauts. And our plan is to do that again. We'll plan to do that again next year. Did we have some lessons learned? Absolutely. But that mission was a huge success. You know, we learned from it. And we were able to do, the Axiom crew, they were able to do some of the CASIS experiments. And that was designed on purpose, right? To maximize the use of and how we can partner with the commercial industry and what we do today. The Boeing mission, the OFT-2 mission, getting that uncrewed mission, young man mission up there. Again, we learned a couple things, but nothing to say that we need to stop. We are going to rock and roll, and we have planned to do the CFT mission next with 2 crew members. And then eventually Boeing will be doing rotation missions on board. All the partners have just been incredible. And, you know, we're also looking at Sierra Nevada's coming on board next year with a cargo mission. The Japanese are working on a new cargo vehicle, the HTVX, that'll be coming. And so, yeah, there's no grass growing under anybody's feet here on board the International Space Station.
Ray, these folks put together experiments or equipment to send. What has been surprising in the past couple of years that you've learned, and what do you see happening in the rest of ISS's life?
So I'm a little new to the game, but I can tell you in the short time I've been here, it's really amazing the kind of cutting edge technology that's being developed. We work with people doing a lot of you know, biopharma, regenerative medicine kind of work. And I don't want to talk to their results clearly, but some of the things that's going on in space would really make people feel good about the investment that the U.S. taxpayers have made. I think we're going to see, you know, game-changing clinical therapies that are going to come out of the work that's coming out of station. I think we're going to find ways to take people that have been broken, you know, either in some kind of an accident or in some other kind of tragedy, and put them back together. And I think that we're gonna look back on what we're doing today, and we're gonna say we were at the beginning of this new advancement in technology. So I'm always, when we're doing reviews of these experiments that we select to fly on space station, amazed at the creativity and the you know, the potential that these experiments, you know, the things that we could derive from these experiments.
While we're on this subject, any advice that you would give those who are thinking about sending something up?
So I would say the only advice is that I find that we limit ourselves more than we should. So the really interesting or way out there experiments are the ones that the ones that are probably going to be the most exciting. So, you know, there's a lot of creative people in this room and not in this room who are contributing, you know, really amazing ideas, things that, you know, boggle the mind that they, you know, they're that creative. So, you know, I'd say dream big, you know, go big or go home.
Yep.
And, you know, don't take a little bit of risk, because the worst thing that can happen is it won't work. But even when it doesn't work, we learn something.
The model is changing, Robyn. If Joel gets his way, maybe a little bit later than earlier, if the station goes a couple more years. But how do you see the transition working to privatization and commercialization? NASA will become a full-on customer, right? You'll go to one of the private stations doing the hard work that NASA does to run your experiments.
Yeah, that's correct. So while we're busy, you know, going full bore on the International Space Station through the end of the decade, we also need to plan for that transition to and are enabling those follow-on commercial space stations to be successful. And the whole idea is we don't want a gap in low Earth orbit. So we need to plan for a smooth transition. It's all about continuity. It's about continuity for NASA. It's about continuity for all of our users who are doing this important research on the space station today. So the trick is to how do we plan for that transition smoothly? And so we are looking at asking our user communities, what do you want to do through the end of space station and through that transition, so that we can plan for that. We're revising our forecasts so that we can communicate those forecasts to these commercial space station developers so they know what to plan for. We're talking to our international partners, because it's really important to us that we keep our international partners with us also as we plan through this transition.
Well, explain that to me, because if a NASA scientist has an experiment and we're at a private station or 2 or 3 stations, do you just place that? Do you do it with the partners? How do you see that relationship working out?
We're looking at that model. We're looking at how do we evolve the NASA model and the National Lab, which represents other government agencies and universities and commercial users. How do we evolve those models as we transition from a government-owned and operated space station to commercially owned and operated space stations? So we'll have service contracts with these commercial space stations for transportation, for accommodation, and we'll buy that as a service. Hopefully, as we say, one of many customers in this economy.
It's basically the commercial cargo, commercial crew model.
Exactly.
Coming to science and doing experiments in space.
Exactly.
And you say you want to overlap, so that means one of these private space stations has to get into space, and they have to have people on board to do the experiments. When do you see that transition happening?
Hopefully by the end of the decade. We know the commercial LEO destination partners we are working with today have plans to be operational as early as 2027. So as soon as they're ready, we're going to start to purchase services so that we can plan for that transition.
So is it fair to say, because Gateway's coming, well, it's not really a space station, I think it's logistics, but you could do long-term experiments on it as well. Will NASA be getting out of the space station business by the end of the decade or soon thereafter?
No, we're not getting out of the space station. We're just changing the model, right? We're always going to need activities in low Earth orbit. Even as we go from low Earth orbit into deep space to the Gateway, to the Moon, to Mars, low Earth orbit's really going to be that place where we test technologies, where we do the human research, where we practice and these things before we take them beyond low Earth orbit.
Joel, what are the challenges over the next several years of completing these science? I'm sure there are more people raising their hands to Ray saying, I want to get up there. I got something I want to figure out whether it works or not.
The biggest challenges are delivering on time, launching on time, returning on time, making sure that we have the up mass available and the down mass available for the scientists to get their hardware up and down. With all these missions going up and down and trying to maintain, we are flying, now we're flying a steady state of 4 USOS crew members. That's doubling our utilization and research time on board the International Space Station, the crew tended part. And so the biggest challenge is our ability to keep up with the scientists and get their hardware up and down as quickly as they want it to be.
And Ray, how does the lab transition? Is it, as Robyn suggested, that you just, with NASA in collaboration, say, okay, we're going to go do this station, we'll put this experiment on station 1, this one on station 2, this one on station 3?
Yeah, so that's the question of the day, right? How do we transition? And I think the way we transition is, obviously we've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work, given the fact that we've been in existence for 10 years, 12 years now. And I think we've learned a lot. We have a lot of good relationships with industry and the research community. And so what we have to do is now, instead of working with NASA as the owner of the space station, how do we transition that model into a more commercial model? So I think there's still a role for somebody who can be kind of that honest broker, because what you really want to do is you want to put the right experiment on the right platform. And so I see we have a role, but I think it's going to be a conversation within this community, people that are in this room and people that aren't in this room, on how that model should look and how it should work. So, I'd tell you, to say we have the answer today, I think all of us would agree. It's evolving, and, I think NASA's doing a great job of soliciting input from the community on how, what models might be the right models to work in the future. So it's evolving, and it's a good conversation. It's a good time to be working in this business.
Can we talk a little bit about what station is, why it was created, what it's become, what you hope it to be? I mean, often government leads the way in seeding investment. It seems like this is one of those cases. And what has been most rewarding for you during your work with where we are today?
From where I get to sit at NASA headquarters, I'm very excited about all of the primary missions of the space station. So it's a test bed. We're getting ready for Artemis and doing the human research and technology testing and closing what we call capability gaps. We're doing research to benefit humanity here on Earth in partnership with the National Lab. It's the international partnership. We're up to 109 countries and areas that have done activities on the International Space Station, and that number keeps growing. And we're literally coloring in the map. It's about inspiring the general public, and it's about enabling commercial. So in all of those areas, the space station, I think, is really fulfilling its full potential, and we're setting goals. We're not just hanging on till commercial space stations are there. We've got definite goals we want to accomplish, and I want to ask all of you out there. I've been running around. Tell me your goals. So what do you want to have accomplished through the life of the space station? We want to help enable that. So please let us know.
For the decade of results.
For the decade of results.
Joel, same question?
I'll say, I look at our role as our government role is to break down the barriers, break down what we can do so people can succeed. Look what SpaceX has been able to do with low Earth orbit. They've taken advantage of what the government did, knocking down those barriers, and they just rocked it, right? They are just putting things up and launching, and they are mastering low Earth orbit. The other thing I see we do is benefiting people here on Earth. In each of your packages, you all got a book called the 2022 Benefits to Humanity. And there were a couple of cool things in there. One, I'll just hit a couple of items. We got a telescope studying neutron stars, a nicer telescope. That technology we're using on Earth to do better CT scans. We've done some work with Lambda Vision on manufacturing artificial retinas. The ability to take what we've done on Earth and restore sight to someone. That's the coolest thing in the world, right? To be able to use the International Space Station to return sight to someone. We've done some work with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. where the initial results are showing we're slowing the progression in half. Now, we still got work to do, but we're showing initial positive results. So a whole book of that, so I encourage people to do that, but that's the benefit of the International Space Station, what we're doing here to people on Earth.
Ray, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so back in '94, I spent a little time here in Washington and then in Houston about what became the ISS. I don't know if everybody remembers, but we had a program called Space Station Freedom, and we then morphed over to this. And I remember it was the director of engineering at JSC that said, he says, let's not make the space station a science experiment. Let's build a space station to do science experiments. And I think we've actually accomplished that. So that's what I'd say.
Wow, I would almost end on that, but I'm going to give you the last word, Robyn. You've made your pitch. Final comments to those here and who are looking to partner with you on the station.
Yeah, just to wrap up, as everything we've said, you know, this is the decade of results. We want to know your goals. We want to help you achieve your goals. We want to communicate about those results. I think it's really important that we continue to tell the story of this incredible platform that we have.
Thank you very much. And I just want to thank the National Lab for giving me another opportunity to speak to astronauts in space. It doesn't suck. It's one of the best things you will ever do. Joel, Ray, Robyn, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, y'all, that was an outstanding session. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a short break. So stand up, stretch your legs, charge your phones, grab a snack, do whatever it is that you need to do for the next 15 minutes so that you can be ready for the next session. We will see you back here at 10:05 for our next panel on space policy. That will highlight how current U.S. space policy will influence the next decade of space-based research, the role of public and private partnerships, and the development of a thriving economy in low Earth orbit. Before you go, please enjoy this conference sponsor highlight video from our gold sponsor, Orbital Reef.
There have been dreams for a very long time of robust commercial activities in space with growing populations and so forth. Now we have access to systems that cost less to launch and land, and we now understand how to build destination systems that last for a long time.
Think of it as a village. Think of it as many different organizations and people in their own parts of Orbital Reef doing their own activities.
Where all types of companies can come together and do research and or production, and also provide opportunities for tourists to come and just experience what space is like.
It's an ecosystem that will allow ideas to grow, to germinate, whole new fields and areas of economic arena, new science that we can't even imagine now.
This unique environment that's only a couple of hundred miles away from us is both transformative and accessible. It's incredibly exciting.
Ladies and gentlemen, if everyone could find their seats, our program will resume in just a couple minutes. Please get to your seats. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if everyone could take their seats, our program is about to resume. Please take your seats. It's Paul, right? Ladies and gentlemen, please once again welcome Patrick O'Neill.
Well, that was a fun way to kickstart the conference. What do you think? All right. I mean, we had the chance to go out there and do a little bit of everything. Talk about research, talk about some news of the day, hear from space station leadership, and then obviously get a chance to hear from some astronauts that are living and working on the space station right now. So an awful lot for us to live up to as we move forward in the conference. So it is not lost on us that we are in Washington, D.C. right now, and since Washington, D.C. is the land of politics, might as well go out there and continue those conversations of politics in space. So with that, I would like to introduce Paul Steimers, who will lead this next discussion. Paul is a partner at the law offices of K&L Gates, a global law firm that specializes in public policy practice and increasingly is much more involved in space policy. He helped to draft and pass the 2015 Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act and has been involved in all major space-related federal legislation since 2008. He is looked upon as a thought leader within the space policy community and has been published in outlets like the Wall Street Journal, the Space Review, Orlando Sentinel, and many others. So with that, please, let's welcome Paul.
Thank you very much. Great to see you all. I'm actually just going to sit down and invite my fellow panelists up, and I'll introduce them as they come up. So I'm going to switch over to the mic. Let's see if this works. Wow, it's still going. That's awesome. So delighted to be joined here today, first of all, by Pam Whitney. And Pam serves as the staff director for the Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics in the House of Representatives, Science and Space and Technology Committee. Formerly, she was a senior program officer at the Space Studies Board at the National Academies, where she directed studies and workshops on space science, policy, international cooperation in space, more on that later, and served as the executive secretary of COSPAR. Other prior positions include serving as an analyst at an aerospace consulting firm, and we're just absolutely delighted to have you here today. Thank you very much, Pam.
Thank you.
Mary Gunther is the Director of Space Policy for the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. CSF is the leading national trade organization for the commercial space industry, with roughly 90 member companies and organizations across the United States. CSF is focused on laying the foundation for a sustainable space economy and democratizing access to space for scientists, students, civilians, and businesses. At CSF, Mary leads the policy development and lobbying efforts where she's focused on promoting policies that enable fair and open competition, spur innovation, and expand public-private partnerships. Before joining CSF, Mary served as a professional staff member at the Senate Commerce Committee. In that position, she was responsible for developing and moving space, manufacturing, and science legislation through the Congress, as well as performing oversight on NASA, NSF, NIST, FAA's AST, and the Department of Commerce's Office of Space Commerce. She was integral to the Senate passage of the NASA Authorization Act of 2019. Mike Gold is the Executive Vice President for Civil Space and External Affairs at Redwire. In this role, he supports the company's business development efforts as well as the government and media relations. Prior to joining Redwire, Mike was NASA, this is going to be a challenge. Mike was NASA's Associate Administrator for Space Policy and Partnerships, and also served as the Acting Associate Administrator for the Office of International and Interagency Relations and Senior Advisor to the Administrator for International and Legal Affairs, a role that required fold-out business cards. At NASA, Mike led the development and implementation of the Artemis Accords, which established norms of behavior to ensure a peaceful and prosperous future in space for all of humanity. Mike also successfully led the negotiations to develop and execute the binding agreements for the Lunar Gateway, including billions of dollars of international contributions. Mike also led the development and implementation of the first lunar resource purchase by NASA. For his trailblazing policy work, Mike was awarded the NASA Outstanding Leadership Medal. Before joining NASA, Mike was Vice President of Civil Space at Maxar and the General Counsel for their Radiant Solutions business unit. He also spent 13 years at Bigelow Aerospace, where he established the company's Washington office. He's held leadership roles at CSF and Comstack. Mike Gold. So I want to thank all of you for being here. I also want to note we had planned to be joined by Joel Graham from the Senate Commerce Committee. Unfortunately, due to some legislation happening up there right now, which we will talk about, he was unable to join us, and he sends his regrets. But delighted to have you all. And I would like to, I had to sort of rearrange some questions because obviously the big news of the day is that Roscosmos is now announcing that they are planning to end their cooperation on the International Space Station in 2024. And so I'd like to give people an opportunity to comment either in their personal position or otherwise about that, since it, I know, is on everybody's mind. Mike, would you like to say a word or two?
Jeez, Paul, and I thought we were friends. Did I get the first?
No, we are not.
Question here, I tell you. You're talking the big news for the day was the Red Sox actually won a game last night. I thought that's what we were talking about at first, but yeah, thank you. Look, there are no challenges, just opportunities. And I truly do believe that you mentioned the Artemis Accords. Whether Russia is in or out of the International Space Station, we need to grow beyond the Cold War paradigm, where it's not just two countries, it's the world supporting the ISS and this next generation of space exploration. There's already been movement at NASA where we want the ISS to reflect more the Accords countries. So we should view this again as an opportunity to broaden the ISS partnership, to look at more innovative ways to integrate commercial partners onto the ISS. So while issues like this can seem like roadblocks or challenges, really it's just an opportunity for us to progress. And the important thing is for America and the partner nations to remain focused on ensuring that we have a continuous crewed presence in low Earth orbit. And that means extending the International Space Station, regardless of what Russia does. We need to get every moment of utility from the ISS that we can, and also proceeding with alacrity to ensure that we can get the commercial LEO stations, the CLD program, up as quickly as possible, allowing for a transition so that the world can continue and enjoy the benefits of low Earth orbit and microgravity research and development that we at Redwire are so excited about, and I know that we'll talk more about during this panel.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah,
Mary? Yeah.
I think Mike is spot on with this being an opportunity and with the importance of ensuring that we have that continuous human crewed presence in low Earth orbit. You know, looking at the ISS transition plan, I think NASA's identified a number of times the importance of ensuring that there is a smooth transition from the ISS to these commercial LEO destinations. And so I think it'll be really critical, particularly as we are seeing the Russians announce that they will be pulling out of the space station, to take a really close look and figure out how we can ensure that that transition is smooth over to the commercial sector, and look at ways where we can engage additional international partners as well as additional commercial capabilities potentially to enable that transition and ensure that we're continuing to meet those national goals that can only be achieved in low Earth orbit.
Yeah, I think the ISS has certainly been such a productive and amazing facility and has taught us invaluable lessons about living and operating in space, conducting research, and preparing for the future of deep space exploration. Maintaining the goal of advancing research and development in low Earth orbit is essential. And so ensuring a smooth transition to a post-ISS environment is going to be critical. And understanding the goals of what we envision a post-ISS environment to look like is going to be essential. So the smooth transition is something that will be a matter of discussion, and leading the way with research and development and commercial opportunities is, I think, where we're looking at.
Thank you, Pam. One of the elements of the CHIPS Plus bill currently being voted on the Senate side is a NASA authorization bill that does extend ISS to 2030. Curious to hear your thoughts and the rest of the panel's thoughts on what else needs to happen in order to make a smooth transition possible.
One of the things I think is going to be important is understanding the requirements of what's needed to enable that effective transition in terms of research requirements, the requirements of academia, the requirements of the applied and commercial sector, and the requirements of government. I think that information is going to be essential for the commercial entities developing and designing space stations, and the more information and insight and understanding that's available to them, I think is going to be helpful at this point going forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Pam on that. It'll be critical to understand what those goals are going to look like and communicate that early and often to commercial partners who are developing these commercial LEO destinations. While government's going to be one customer of many, they're going to be an important customer, particularly at the beginning of operations and figuring out how do we get from A to B. So that'll be an important component. And I'd also flag it's really important to be thoughtful. And I'm glad to be here today with the ISS National Lab, as well as many academic scientists and others, at a time when we're thinking about what that demand generation looks like and how we're using the International Space Station to do that. You know, I don't think it's a secret to anyone in this room that microgravity presents quite a few opportunities for commerce, for advancing research, and we are looking at a future where we will be quite likely performing some form of manufacturing in space, which is deeply exciting. But we're not going to get to that endpoint and get the information we need to continue developing and facilitating that as a nation unless we are thinking now about planting that seed corn and investing in these research ideas that are going to help kind of incentivize and help folks think through and clarify what those business opportunities are and what they are not.
And we at Redwire are manufacturing items on the ISS today, only company to successfully do so. And I truly believe that the companies and countries that master microgravity research and development and manufacturing will be the economic leaders of the future. And farther than that, probably the national security leaders as well. There was other news besides Russia in terms of China launching the second element to its International Space Station because they recognize the tremendous economic and national security benefits of microgravity research and development. And to answer your question, we need government as catalyst and government as customer. That the government has a very important role to prime the pump, to allow these amazing benefits to be garnered by the United States and international partners. And one of the best ways for that to happen, we've seen the success of COTS, we've seen the success of CRS, is to follow that model and to actually purchase what is produced. And if the government can serve that role, I think we can have not only a successful transition from ISS to commercial stations, but a successful transition from an industry that is largely dependent on government to an actual commercial paradigm, which is so exciting, not only what it will mean for all of us and for humanity's adventure into space, but space has never been just about the exploration and the awe-inspiring scientific discoveries, which are wonderful, and it's amazing what we're seeing come out of the James Webb, but we can do so much to help life here on Earth. New medicines, new types of agriculture that can deal with climate change. We can feed the hungry, heal the sick, and that should be the ultimate goal of what we're all here to do today and to accomplish in space.
Thank you, Mike. Pam, Mike had earlier mentioned the importance of a continuous human presence in low Earth orbit. What is the committee thinking about that at this point, and where do you see that going in terms of our priorities?
Well, first I should say that my caveat is that I'm speaking on my own behalf, and so I'm not representing any official positions of the committee. But I think this gets back to the issue of what are our goals in low Earth orbit following the ISS, and what is needed. And a human presence is certainly connected to that in terms of carrying out research, in terms of human spaceflight operations. So I think that's really the first question is what is the objective and what are the needs and how are humans going to support those roles and objectives as we look ahead. So I think this is going to be a very timely conversation in terms of ensuring that we have a clear vision of what our future in low Earth orbit is going to be.
So in addition to the scientific and economic benefits, there are national security and diplomatic benefits from leadership in space. And we're seeing that certainly in the fact that that the CHIPS Plus bill, a competition bill, includes the NASA Authorization Act. We've certainly seen it throughout the space program, which started as a race with the Soviet Union. And as Mike noted, we've seen China just launch its second module. They continue to move forward. Russia, in the process of announcing its intent to pull out, also talked about its Ross program, which may or may not turn out to occur, but is still something that they're pushing. The question is, how do we use our leadership in space as a tool of American diplomacy, as a tool of American soft power around the world in a way that is positive, that is transparent, that is equitable, and as a contrast to some of what our competitors are doing in space?
Well, I think the ISS has been a great example of that soft power. And as Mike mentioned, the Artemis Accords, which are certainly building a framework for looking ahead and deep space exploration. And I think, Congress has clearly articulated over successive NASA authorizations that deep space exploration to the moon and Mars is envisioned to be an international activity with international partners. And so I think it's important to maintain those relationships, to fortify those relationships, to establish the mechanisms of transparency, to ensure that we're continuing to move along that path.
Yeah, I'd love to, take a step back and kind of look at the premise of that question in that, as we're thinking about how we maintain that leadership, making sure that we're highlighting American values as we move forward, because I think that is part of the question as well as part of the answer. And I think that the way that we do that is by highlighting, American freedom, American ingenuity, American innovation, and making sure that we are really amplifying that free enterprise and folks being able to innovate in space and come up with an idea and take it to fruition. So I think it's really exciting to not only be making sure that we are bringing our international partners with us through mechanisms like the Artemis Accords, but also leading by example in how we would like to see other nations kind of proceed in that space.
Space isn't just about better technology. It's about building a better future. And I think far too often, particularly we in industry, take it for granted that there is the most extraordinary and complex mechanical object mechanism, the International Space Station, orbiting today, populated by an international group of astronauts, built by a coalition of global countries, and have conducted hundreds of experiments for countries across the world. That's amazing. That's wonderful. That's extraordinary. And it deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. It is a scandal that such an extraordinary effort has not been awarded one, and I hope we take care of that. So we need to recognize that the ISS hasn't just moved technology forward, it's created this amazing global coalition. And even with the news today, we need to take that and say, how can we expand that coalition further? How can we do more? And Pam, you raised beyond LEO exploration. I think it's very important to note that the ISS and low Earth orbit is critical to the success of our beyond low Earth orbit plans. Whether it's the astronaut training, whether it's the technology. We're so thrilled at Redwire to use our rollout solar arrays for our customer at Boeing to develop these new systems that we're going to need to go to the moon, to go to Mars. So LEO is not separate from Artemis and beyond LEO. I consider the ISS a critical part of the Artemis Accords and the Artemis program. And ultimately, there are always going to be more launch opportunities, more people in low Earth orbit than we would have in beyond LEO. So if we want to maintain America's role geopolitically and stand up for the values of America, we must maintain a continuous presence in low Earth orbit.
I think it's also going to be important to ensure that the public is part of that conversation, that there's a continuous dialogue of these benefits, the research benefits, the technology benefits, and the human spaceflight skills and operational benefits, as well as the diplomatic benefits. I think that connection to how these efforts serve some of our US goals and our international goals is going to help ensure that the public understands what we're doing and why.
Absolutely. An anecdote, I was being interviewed by the BBC when I was at NASA and was asked, why should we invest in space when the Earth faces such crises like global climate change? And it's so frustrating for me where I had to explain, we wouldn't even know or certainly understand climate change if it wasn't for the space industry. So I think you're exactly correct, Pam. And as much as I enjoy talking to this wonderful, august audience, we need to talk more outside of the industry and get to the farmers, get to fishermen, get to people who we can show that space will impact and improve their lives in a real fashion. I don't even think people appreciate how cell phones work through space. So I would just encourage all of us to get out beyond the space bubble and talk to people about why space matters.
I think that's absolutely critical, and you mentioned earlier what a tremendous achievement the International Space Station is. I want to take a moment and say it's eclipsed just by the fact that there was a successful video conference earlier. And even after 2 years of COVID, nobody can do that first try, so congratulations to the video conference team. Well done. But it's been just a tremendous achievement, and it does need to be explained and celebrated. You know, the public relations campaign surrounding the web first images, I think, was an excellent approach to it. It was that's the kind of thing that we need to share with everybody. What tremendous activities NASA in general is up to, the private sector supporting NASA here in the International Space Station and beyond. Going back to the question of how the International Space Station and its research agenda helps our moon effort and our moon to Mars effort and our other deep space exploration, certainly we've learned a tremendous amount about long duration space flight, about the kinds of things we need to be able to do to survive in a closed environment for a long period of time. I'm curious to hear your thoughts more about how ISS is contributing to our efforts and what more we want to see from that.
Well, thank you. That's an important question. And one thing that is still a clear and present need is to understand the effects of microgravity on the human body. NASA certainly collected a lot of data over the years through its human research program, but there are still many questions and still ongoing risks that need to be mitigated. And so this is an area where the time on the ISS is essential for making as much progress as possible to understand those risks, to understand the countermeasures for those risks, because this is what's going to enable as safe as possible human exploration beyond. The radiation environment is one of the top biomedical and human health risks, and these kinds of questions are still very much in need of research attention.
Certainly. I mean, I think it's important to look at the space ecosystem as a whole, and the International Space Station is a critical component in there, as is suborbital, as will the moon be a science destination, and as will Mars. And so thinking through how we de-risk technology that we're going to need as we move forward, whether it's for keeping humans alive, whether it's for enabling further exploration and commerce at these other destinations, kind of using each of these not only as an independent science destination, but also as a de-risking destination for science, as well as these new technologies and technology development that we're going to need moving forward. So I'm really glad to see NASA thinking through and industry thinking through how do we make sure that we're taking advantage of everything that's available to us in this era of steadily decreasing launch costs and taking the most advantage of each and every one of these destinations in not always a linear fashion, but thinking through, if we really need this technology to work on the moon, how can we use these other destinations to ensure that we get there and we get there safely?
The ISS is a singular technological incubator. It's unparalleled. There's simply no other environment or place like it. And relative to exploration, and I just echo the comments that Pam and Mary made, but also for in-space manufacturing, our exploration programs. Unfortunately, when you're on the moon, and this is even more true for Mars, you can't drop by the hardware store and pick up what you need. And the ability to, as John Bellinger from our team says, head of our in-space manufacturing group, make it, don't take it. And the ability to learn to develop that capability where we can 3D print parts as we conduct this journey to space will substantially reduce mass, substantially reduce the amount of spares that we need to bring, lower costs while enhancing safety. That if we can ultimately build something that's going to be a far safer mission. And at the same time, again, leveraging microgravity for applications on Earth, we're going through a golden age of space exploration. Again, there's never been a more exciting time, but believe it or not, I'm too young to have lived through Apollo, but I believe this is even more exciting because more people involved, more companies, more countries, more diversity, more inclusion. And when we engage the pharmaceutical sector, biotech, I mean, they just spent more on research and development for the time we've spent on this panel than the entire NASA budget, probably. And when we bring that money and that innovation to bear, as well as material science, we're going to transform not just the space industry, but life on Earth as well.
And to that note, I think there are so many opportunities to follow on what Mike just said about opportunities on Earth. I mean, we've just been through, and we're still in, this pandemic, which is extremely relatable in many ways to the remoteness of space. I mean, you've got an opportunity with the ISS and some of the work they've been doing on telemedicine. Mike mentioned manufacturing, the whole concept of autonomy. During the pandemic, we've all had a few telehealth visits, but there's such a connection to some of the challenges we face and the opportunities we have here, where the advances due to the challenges of the space environment can really support so much, and establishing and again communicating those connections, I think, is vital.
Absolutely. And I would just add, one of the most important things about the ability to make objects in space or at your destination is that we can finally start reducing the number of places we'll have to rescue Matt Damon from. Because that's getting expensive. Speaking of expensive, we built the space station without a lot of regard to the economics of the project. And now we're in a transition where the economic situation is becoming more of an element in decision making, whether it's the commercial side or how to transition it and so forth. And so I'm curious, from each of your perspectives, the thoughts on how to make the economics work, both from a research and commercial perspective, from a commercial destinations perspective, and from a federal funding perspective.
So I think we need to continue to lean in to what has worked so well, which is public-private partnerships. I mean, we go back in time, America was #1 in terms of commercial space launch, only country doing it. And we went from being #1 to having only one launch per year, and sometimes none. And what we did with COTS and CRS, and now with Gateway Logistics, with the Human Landing System, these commercial partnerships have transformed our industry and transformed what the global space economy looks like. And there's a lot of private sector dollars, a lot of interest out there. And what I'm excited about, it's not just wealthy billionaires or entrepreneurs, real capital, traditional capital is coming to our markets, and that's a huge sign of success. So this is where NASA and the government as a whole has an opportunity to leverage those investments, to leverage those desires, and for the commercial sector to be a partner, both in terms of investment as well as developing that business case. But that means we also need to look at space a little bit differently, that far too often we would begin with a platform and then figure out what the business case would be. We need to do the opposite of that now to an extent, where we look at where the business case is and that drives the platform. So I think engaging with the private sector, and beware of false dichotomies. Far too often I get asked, well, is it the private sector or is it government? Government, private sector. The answer is both. We're stronger together. There wouldn't be this robust private sector if it wasn't for NASA, if it wasn't for DARPA. We wouldn't be innovating if it wasn't for the ISS. At the same time, we need that new commercial energy. And then, everyone take a sip of coffee, there's regulatory reform. It's tough achieving escape velocity from red tape, and we do, second only to gravity, the ITAR had the best chance of keeping some of my missions from launching back in the Bigelow days. And those continue to be serious problems, particularly as we transition from the ISS to commercial destinations. So we need to keep our eye on the ball there and make sure that we address continued reforms to export control. The ISS enjoys several aspects of export control benefits that we need to look at applying to commercial stations. And we need to resolve the Article 6 issue relative to who actually regulates and who provides the continuing supervision as required by the Outer Space Treaty for innovative commercial activities such as commercial space stations. So we need to make sure that we create a regulatory environment that is conducive to growth and also conducive to international partnerships. That, again, part of what we're doing here is not just growing technology, but growing that global partnership to support geopolitical needs and create a better future for all of us. So I know it can be nuanced, I know it can be boring, but, and I don't want to offend all the engineers, the engineering can be the easy part. There's no rocket equation for Congress or for regulatory reform, and we need to pay attention to those issues now so that we're not dealing with problems down the road.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Mike more. Looking at this kind of commercial revolution that really NASA and DARPA and other federal government investment helped create in the early aughts and even prior to that. It's really exciting to see these missions that are, if we were looking to perform them with traditional technology, would be substantially more expensive. So I think it's critical to be thinking about how we can go further and faster and cheaper together. A critical component of that is competition and making sure that we are not reliant on one single actor to the greatest extent possible, and making sure that we are managing that risk in an appropriate manner. But it's been truly exciting to see this commercial revolution, and I think that we do need to take a good, hard look at that regulatory environment that Mike was highlighting. I don't think I could say it any better than him, but I just want to make sure I'm foot stomping his remarks, because figuring out how we reduce that red tape while maintaining our international treaty regulation requirements, as well as protecting public safety, thinking about how we make sure that there is kind of a clear and streamlined manner that missions, particularly missions that haven't been performed before, these kind of novel applications, have a really clear path to go through so that it's not, oh, ask this person, ask that person, go to this agency. You'd be running all over this town trying to figure it out, depending on who is guiding you through that. So ensuring that there is some kind of a clear, concise, and streamlined way for folks to move forward so that these companies and these actors are able to get through that red tape in a way that satisfies the government interest while getting commercial up on orbit as quickly as possible.
Pam, your committee has been a champion for the interests of the scientific community and the associated commercial teams throughout this entire process. How have you found it working with state, with the Defense Department and so forth, in terms of trying to get through to a place where we can do this more effectively, while recognizing that there are significant national security interests that need to be addressed?
If you're talking about regulatory? Well, I think, it's certainly an important factor that needs to be considered as we look ahead. But I think also we want to understand, what does that look like? What is going to provide the level of certainty that commercial sector needs? What guidelines, provide the necessary certainty and regulatory understanding without, being too overly restrictive? I think there's going to need to be a conversation of what is that appropriate balance to ensure that the framework is set up, and my hunch would be it's likely to be an evolutionary framework that as the sector grows, it's revisited and changes, as have other commercial regulations. So I think, a clear understanding of what that appropriate balance is, what's needed to provide the certainty, what's needed to ensure the safety, is something that, is where we're, I think, where we're starting.
Well, thank you. So I would like to talk a little bit about how there have been some proposals made for ways that the government can recoup some of its investment in low Earth orbit and in space. One had been an idea for royalties. There have been some others. I'm curious to hear the panel's thoughts about when's the appropriate time and what is the appropriate way for the government to recoup its investment, or is it doing so already?
I kind of want to draw on some things that Pam was saying with regards to our last question, where I think that there is a lot of value of having kind of an evolutionary schema of, today may not be that day, but I think it's an important question to be asking and thinking about, is making sure that the government does recoup its investment. That being said, I also think it's important to think through, what does that look like? Does that need to be in the form of a fee or a royalty? Or are we looking at space's contribution to our GDP as a nation and our economic development? Because I think if you're looking at that, the Department of Defense itself actually has some really wonderful stats, and I wish I could remember them off the top of my head, but they've looked at what a day without space would look like and what that economic impact would look like, as well as that societal impact, right? You can't go to an ATM. You can't use Google Maps, there's no Uber, so you're gonna have a really hard time getting anywhere, getting anything, or doing much, frankly. And so I think that it's important to make sure that there is always a government interest, and we're considering the nation's goals and the taxpayer investment in a lot of these platforms and in the low Earth orbit economy. But also that we are thinking about it in terms of kind of these creative ways of looking forward and making sure that we are looking at it from an evolutionary standpoint so that we don't accidentally quash the industry before it really has a chance to flourish in a major way.
So I can say with certainty, now is not the time to be looking to reap the benefits of what is still a relatively immature industry, particularly in terms of the products that we're producing in space. And I believe that the focus should not be on royalties for spacecraft or what's going on the International Space Station today. I've really applauded a lot of the zero-G, zero tax bills, et cetera. But where the focus should be is growing new markets. If we talk about stem cells in space, the regenerative medicine that could come from microgravity development, new material science, new computer chips, that's where the country and the world can reap the benefits, whether that's taxes that you get from the jobs that were created, et cetera, or just the benefits to ending human suffering and feeding the hungry. So I think it would be short-sighted to focus on what's happening today and instead do whatever we can to build the markets of tomorrow that will ultimately provide more jobs, more revenue, and more benefits than anything you might get from taxing activities on the ISS or even a commercial space station today. And we have to remember that this is no longer occurring in a vacuum. We talked about the Chinese station. I've been to the United Nations in their center in Vienna. First thing you see when you walk through the door is a Chinese Long March model. And at the UN, and I give China credit for this, they're extremely proactive in reaching out to the rest of the world and saying, for free, come to our space station. And believe you me, the benefits of microgravity research, development, manufacturing will occur. We will see this amazing future. The question is, does it occur under Chinese auspices or American auspices with our international partners?
Thank you, Mike. So we have an opportunity to take a couple of questions from the audience. So if anybody has a question that they would like to share either directly or through the app, we're happy to.
Hey, Paul. This is Lori. I'm back here. We have a couple questions, so we're going to get started with one. The designation of the U.S. segment of a national laboratory was done, in part, to assure the availability of non-NASA research in LEO. How might that goal be continued in evolving into a post-ISS LEO environment?
Well, I think that's an open question. The ISS National Lab was designated for the ISS, and in terms of what that looks like on a post-ISS environment with commercial or alternative platforms, it is still a question that's going to be need to be grappled with, and it gets back to sort of what are our goals, what are the options for how we ensure that the U.S. maintains leadership in research and development. We know that NASA is going to continue to have research needs going forward, but I think these are questions that are certainly timely for consideration now and need to be thought through.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that this is an open question. And there are a lot of different forms that this could take. And I don't know that any decisions have been made about that yet. But this is an important discussion to be had because we want to make sure that we are enabling that scientific contribution, that scientific work that can only be conducted in microgravity. So I think it's a great question, and it's something that we're going to need to be talking about as a community together for years to come, and we'll definitely need to come to a conclusion on that prior to the transition to commercial space stations.
So I see the need, at least generally, for groups like the National Lab, NSF, anything the government can do to help accelerate, to expand microgravity research, development, commercialization, only increasing in the days to come. The ISS is an incredible foundation to build upon. And again, we need to leverage the ISS for as long as we can, but when we build upon it, we have new platforms, new opportunities. That's only going to increase the need, the importance of government to partner with the private sector and to move forward aggressively. So I actually see the development need, utilization of National Lab, of NSF, of NASA being a catalyst again and customer growing in hopefully extraordinary ways as we see the commercial platforms eventually grow and take the place of the ISS to create an amazing future that we can't even imagine today.
Thank you. Lori, do we have another question?
We sure do. To what extent does the current legislation address the policy underpinnings for the transition to a post-ISS LEO environment, including definition of NASA's ongoing long-term requirements for a LEO presence?
The connection of, if I heard the question correctly, the connection of LEO to deep space exploration is if I
think the question is about the transition from ISS to the next stage and how we're going to maintain all the requirements that where the federal government's priorities are going to be.
So the legislation does authorize extension of the ISS through 2030, and it does include provisions to ensure that there's safety in doing so, and assessments related to ensuring the safety of the operations, and that there's a focus on some of the priorities for enabling deep space exploration going forward. Things that we've been talking about, human health, basic science, and understanding the technology needs for enabling humans beyond low Earth orbit. So there's certainly some core provisions that look toward the future and in terms of the ISS and going beyond Moon to Mars.
So this could be the coffee talking, but I'm actually optimistic and encouraged by what's happening on Capitol Hill right now. And kudos to Pam and Dick Oberman and Mary and all of her former colleagues. Joel Graham couldn't be with us because he's working hard already. But look at what's happening with the PBR for commercial LEO development. Who here remembers when that was $15 million for quite a while? And to see the presidential budget request at the levels that they're at, and to see that reflected in legislation, shows that Capitol Hill, in combination with the administration, which kudos to them for embracing what's occurring with the transition and being very supportive of it, and great people like Senator Nelson and Pam Elroy and Bahavia Lal, and we'll hear from Bob Cabana and Kathy and Vanessa and others soon. But they've really embraced it. The money is starting to flow. And again, beware of the false dichotomies that I get asked about. Well, is it the ISS or is it CLD? ISS or free flying? Again, the answer is both. And that's what's reflected in the legislation, where we have extensions to the ISS until 2030 and then robust funding for CLD. That is the path to success and the path to ensuring continuous crewed presence in LEO. And we're largely seeing it out of Capitol Hill. So I applaud what our colleagues are doing on Capitol Hill and hope to see more of it.
And I want to just add that one of the things in that legislation is also ensuring that transition planning is ongoing and updated, and that so that's going to be an important role of the government and NASA ensuring this effective transition is continuing to look at milestones, continuing to look at whether we're on track to ensure that seamless transition and avoid a gap.
Thank you. Any further questions, Lori?
There are.
Right.
That actually was one. So thanks, Pam, for just being so forward and thinking and answering that. That was one of the questions. One of the other questions is are there any potential risks for the government in having only private sector R&D infrastructure in low Earth orbit?
Nope, guess not.
Well,
go ahead.
I think that's an interesting question, and I kind of want to draw on some of the things that Mike was saying earlier in terms of those false dichotomies. And I think that while we are transitioning to commercial LEO platforms, we're not going to be losing that investment in science from NASA, from the NSF, and from other entities. So I would almost hesitate to kind of push back there and say, while we are transitioning to commercial LEO destinations, there certainly will be a government role as a customer and as a catalyst moving forward. So I don't think the government is abandoning low Earth orbit or microgravity research in any sense by moving to these private stations.
And that transition represents the success of the extraordinary efforts of many of you in this room and what NASA did to create the foundation of the ISS. I'm one who believes in evolution in all cases, and space must evolve. That we have proven the capabilities of American and international infrastructure to support LEO capabilities, and just like we went and launched from cargo to crew, and now the platform can be supported by the private sector. We saw this happen in aviation and in the satellite industry, where satellites used to be all government. And then look what happened when we made the transition to commercial. So I would ask the same thing, are you worried about the commercial sector taking over the satellite industry? It's been a wonderful thing for us, yet government continues to have a strong role in terms of being customer, being catalyst, supporting those activities in LEO. But more than anything, it then frees up government to take that next giant leap, to focus on what NASA does best, which is to push the envelope of exploration via the Artemis program to the moon and to Mars and beyond. And I know I'm really looking forward to that launch a couple of months from now and seeing that first step in the Artemis journey take place at Kennedy Space Center.
Well, thank you, Mike. We're almost at time. I just want to ask Pam, is there anything that you'd like to tell the audience as we wrap up the panel? Anything that you're looking for on the committee, or anything that we can do to make your job easier?
Well, really appreciate the engagement that stakeholders have with us and all that you do. Please, we benefit so much from the information, the resources you provide, bringing us your progress, your ideas, your challenges. So that's such an important way that we sort of understand what's happening in your world. And so I just invite you to continue to communicate with us and share with us your progress, your challenges, and issues that you want us to be aware of.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all of our panelists, and we'll toss it back to Jennifer for the rest of the program. Thank you all very much.
And thank you to Paul, and thank you so much to our panelists. Wow, you all have given us a lot to consider from a space policy perspective. So we're going to move forward to the next section here. Now that we have learned about the past, learned about a lot of the things that we're moving forward in with the future, we're going to bring up our next team of folks. So give me just 1 second while we get ready to transition. Be right back. All right. Now, as Chief Scientist at NASA, Catherine Calvin advises agency leadership on the agency's science programs and science-related strategic planning and investments. As a senior climate advisor, she provides insights and recommendations for the agency's climate-related science, technology, and infrastructure programs. I'd like to invite Ms. Catherine and her panelists to the stage.
Thank you, Jennifer. The International Space Station hosts hundreds of research experiments from U.S. government agencies, academia, and commercial users to benefit people and commerce on the ground, while also advancing technologies and procedures necessary to send the first woman and first person of color to the moon, and the first humans to Mars. These resources on the ISS are split 50-50 between NASA and the ISS National Laboratory, with NASA's work focused on space exploration and the ISS National Lab focusing on what research and discoveries can do to make a better life for all of us here on the ground. So today we're chatting with the chief scientists from NASA's ISS program and the ISS National Lab about this important partnership as critical research moves forward into the next decade of ISS. So let me introduce first Kurt Costello, ISS Chief Scientist and Deputy Manager of the ISS Research Integration Office. He represents all NASA research on the ISS and provides recommendations to the ISS Program Manager, ISS Research Integration Office Manager, and to various mission directorates at NASA headquarters. He ensures science leadership on ISS research and leads the definition of science needs for the ISS program. Also on stage is Mike Roberts, Chief Scientific Officer at the ISS National Lab. Before joining Cassie's, he supported NASA and the Kennedy Space Center, where he was a microbial ecologist and principal investigator and research group lead at NASA's Advanced Life Support Program. So let's welcome Mike and Kurt. So I don't know about all of you, but I have a lot of questions for our guests, so I'll just get started. So the ISS has entered its third decade of human-tended operation in science. The first decade was the decade of construction. The second decade transitioned from initial research into full utilization. And now we're in the decade of results. So what do you see as working in the research realm? That is, what should we continue going forward, and what needs improvement? And I'll start with you.
Yeah, so let's talk about that decade of results, because as Robyn Gatens said earlier today, that's a phrase she coined. But we've been getting results from Space Station ever since we flew our first payloads on Expedition 0. And to date, we've had over 2,275 research results published, which is really amazing. So what do we mean in terms of the decade of results? To date, again, we've had roughly 350 of those publications have been in top-tier journals, meaning the journals that produce science that is most impactful to the communities, both nationally and internationally. Just looking at the last 2.5 years, so during COVID and during the time period where we've had 4 crew on orbit, over half of those research publications in top-tier journals have occurred. So what we're seeing in this third decade is an acceleration of the results. It takes time to do science. It takes a lot of time to do great science. And now we're seeing more and more of that. So this is really working. You know, the ability to have the crew time to do this research on orbit, the ability to populate our open science databases and make this data available to the world is incredible, and it's going to help us improve the scientific return of the space station. So as long as we can operate this way, as long as we can keep going at this rate, we're going to see astounding results coming from ISS. So I think, you know, what's really working well is the dedication of our scientists to using the platform. And what we need to improve, again, is just sharing the data, getting it out there, allowing people to do it. And when I talked about results, I'm talking about direct results from the teams. Of course, people then derive results from that research and build their own research programs, both on the ground and for future spaceflight research.
Yeah, thanks. Mike, do you want to add?
Yeah, from the perspective of the ISS National Laboratory, so keep in mind that we're going on 22 years of continuous human presence in space, which is an amazing accomplishment. But more importantly than just having humans in space, we've been able to highlight what Kurt just spoke about, tremendous accomplishments in many different fields of science and technology discovery. So with the creation of the ISS National Laboratory in 2005, and then its transfer for co-management with CASIS in 2011, we've seen, as Kurt spoke about, an acceleration in the pace of discovery on that platform. And in large part, that was driven not only by NASA and the international partners' continuous investment in new platforms and new capabilities, but increasing engagement with the commercial sector has been key to that success. So with the ISS National Lab, we're fortunate in to be able to leverage that prior success and devotion to making the International Space Station such a capable tool at the edge of space. And we're looking forward to enjoying this next decade of results. So as you've heard, the first 10 years of station were focused on assembly, and we learned a lot, more I would say on the technology development engineering side. In the next 10 years, it was about filling it up, so it was focused on utilization and improving the fidelity of tools on board the International Space Station. Now we have a fully operating station which is able to not only serve the needs of NASA and the international partners to further their goals for additional human exploration of space, but we're able to open access to the International Space Station for commercial institutions to direct their own research. And as you heard in the panel this morning, that has already led to several discoveries in the areas of cell-based science and new materials research, which we covered in a couple of workshops yesterday. So we truly are at the edge of a new acceleration event unlike any that we've seen before. And what we're hoping to see from this moment forward is to continue to build that momentum and have that momentum transferred over to the commercial LEO destinations, so that in addition to there not being any gap in access to low Earth orbit for human exploration, we're able to not miss a note and be able to continued access for research and technology development that serves not only the goals of exploration, but the goals of scientific discovery and improving the human condition here on Earth.
Thank you. And so, Mike, you mentioned an acceleration event. So we're moving towards more and more research. And you also mentioned, some of the things we can improve going forward, getting data to people. From both of your perspectives, what do you see as the most constrained resources currently in doing research? Kurt?
Yeah, and everybody here is probably familiar with the fact that in the previous decade, one of the most constraining resources had been crew time. And as Joel said earlier, since moving to 4 USOS crew, we've doubled the amount of crew time we have available. We have plenty of science to fill that time, but that's not the most constraining resource anymore. With a launch schedule as busy as ours, and with new providers coming online, the difficulty has changed to one of being able to get the science there and to be able to return the samples back to Earth. So really that's become our most constraining resource, the large bag items, the big bag items that need to go up, and then the samples that need to come down. So as a community, what we can really do to help with that situation is understand that that is really what our driving resource limitation is right now. And that means if you've got samples that you're preparing to fly to space, what can we do as a team to work together to make sure that we maximize the number of samples available to give us some launch flexibility in that schedule, to be able to get your samples there in pristine condition so the science that you do on board can return those samples effectively. That is really the biggest one, but the point is the constraining resources change over time. And today it might be big bags, someday later it might be power available on board, or maybe data bandwidth coming down. As we utilize more and more of the station, that's always a shifting proposition, and we have to understand that we need to be dynamic in our responses, but as a community we can do things to help. Fly smaller bags, assemble things more on orbit rather than taking up big bag space, and particularly being able to support the launch campaigns as best we can.
Thanks. Mike?
So Kurt certainly touched, I think, on many of the logistical issues. I would say that some challenges that we still have, I don't know if they're getting any worse. I think they're actually getting better, but I would say imagination and funding, right? We have a limited amount of time in the life of the International Space Station. NASA is working very hard in ensuring a transition with no gaps to these new platforms. So we need to keep the community engaged. We need to continue our work at ISS National Lab and at NASA with other government agencies that can help provide funding to benefit from access to space. We're seeing increased interest and continuing sustained interest from National Science Foundation, from National Institutes of Health, from Department of Defense. We're in communication with National Institute of Standards and Technology and Department of Commerce. They're all elements of each of those research portfolios and their mission to the nation that can benefit from continuous access to space. So in helping drive that forward, we'll be able to address some of the limitations we have in the taxi ride and access to the actuation of experiments in orbit. We're also looking forward to new improvements and new capabilities from the payload developers and service providers. The International Space Station itself was designed a few decades ago there have been tremendous advancements in miniaturization of different technologies, and some of those are taking longer to translate to the microgravity environment and others. So as those commercial LEO destination developers start to think about ways that they can support not only research and technology development, but actually support manufacturing in the space environment of products that have economic benefit here on Earth, we need to continue to keep our eyes on ways to improve the level of service that's offered there to benefit the entire R&D community, as well as those seeking to derive profit from improved products and services.
Thanks. So you mentioned commercial and benefits on Earth, and I want to come back to both of those. But first, I actually want to touch on something that Kurt mentioned about, the challenges change over time. Science also changes over time. So we're continually developing new technologies, new ways of doing things. And so when I think about this from a science perspective, we have, there's a lot more interest in things like machine learning. There's also a lot more citizen science. NASA has a lot of citizen science campaigns. And do you see these as ways of enabling research on the International Space Station and helping with some of those resource constraints, either the ones I mentioned or other technologies and ways of doing science?
Absolutely. Whether you're doing physical sciences on the space station or biological sciences, there is an open source database available to you to be able to put your research results, to put your ground testing results, and to benefit the communities at large. So whether that's Gene Lab on the biological sciences side or the physical sciences database out of Marshall on the physical sciences side, you can put your data in there and enable these things, enable citizen science. As we go into the future, one of the areas that we really need to improve on is our analytical capabilities of analysis of samples on orbit. And that helps us generate big data. Big data is really what AI and machine learning can benefit from, and searching these databases, being able to look for patterns that we're not catching, but some machines are better at that task than us. Those are great ways to pull out new discoveries. And so whatever we can do, the best way we can get that information into databases, do the analysis, enable our citizens to go off and do their own science. BPS does, that's the Biological and Physical Sciences Division, does a great job supporting those databases and also supporting grants for people to do citizen science and investigate those databases. So we are excited about the fact that we have them in place, and we want to see more science coming down from station in an analytical form that people can do additional science on when it's on the ground.
And what about for you? Are you seeing more of this through ISS National Lab and the interest there?
Absolutely. I'm reminded of a view that one of my science mentors had long ago, was that science, like Russ, never sleeps. So you're always trying to understand and better explore phenomena using new tools. So access to machine learning, access to artificial intelligence, and improvements in the ability to do higher throughput experiments with more iteration in space is an extremely important design criteria moving forward. So the International Space Station itself was designed to serve multiple users and multiple functions. That also means that it's not able to do any one particular function to its optimum efficiency. So with the selection of commercial LEO destination platforms going forward, there will be an opportunity to build more specialized modules that can focus on specific areas of experimentation, so that we're not limited to having to cram everything into one or two glove boxes to address the needs of both the physical sciences and the life sciences community. And as you heard this morning, we've seen tremendous interest in advances in tissue chip and stem cell technology and microgravity. And we're only beginning to scratch the surface of what's possible there. So we need to start building for the future now and thinking about ways to improve our throughput. And machine learning, artificial intelligence are going to be extremely important to that, because those can provide much more data value than simply generating the data is. What we need are more tools on the back end to understand what we've observed and how it's correlated with what we believe to be the cause of those changes.
So you just mentioned a couple of things, tissue chips and combustion. There's also research on crops. And the thing I'm continually impressed by when I read about what's going on the ISS is just the breadth of the research, everything from health to physical sciences to crops. And so I'm just curious if you could each comment on how you've seen the breadth of research evolve over time and where that might go in the next decade.
I'll start with that one. So one of the very neat instruments on the International Space Station, which we take no credit for, but is book kept under ISS National Lab, is the alpha magnetic spectrometer. So you have to keep in mind that not only we speak a lot about access to microgravity, and as a life scientist, I tend to focus on the life sciences sort of the portfolio, and understanding microgravity as an accelerator of human conditions here on Earth. So we can take those stem cell models and tissue chips into space and see the effects of prolonged exposure to mechanical unloading at the cellular level, which happens to the astronauts and the crew. Now, obviously NASA and the international partners have learned how to address deficits to crew upon exposure to that environment. But for longer term missions, we still need to understand more about that. So we've been able to leverage that. So thinking about the breadth of experiments and going from an instrument which is designed to look back into space outside of our solar system to a variety of Earth-focused sensors which are utilizing the International Space Station not only as an Earth-observing platform, but are solely focused on technology development. So one of the features of the International Space Station for sensor and technology development is you have the opportunity to test those devices in low Earth orbit and recover not only the data, but recover the hardware itself. So we're able to accelerate the pace of discovery by being able to use these instruments in real-world situations. And that's led to direct improvements in the ability of those sensors to continue to support our monitoring of climate change in that environment. There have also been significant improvements with data derived from International Space Station and data fusion. We have the ability to generate multispectral, polyspectral data that, as Mike Gold alluded to this morning, we wouldn't really understand what's going on with climate change were it not for our ability to do space. And the International Space Station has played, I think, a very important and key role in that going forward.
Great.
Yeah, the space station is a multidisciplinary lab. I like to say we cover everything from astronomy to zoology. And what you see if you look at the ISS research books that we publish at the end of each year is that almost every discipline is represented on board the ISS in terms of science. And what we've seen over the years is that fundamental discoveries feed into more applied research in many different fields. One of those in particular is fluids, how fluids interact in a microgravity environment, how the forces on those fluids when surface tension becomes the dominant force instead of gravity, how that helps with water and fluid transport. Those feed into our biology experiments for how we process tissue chips. They feed into other experiments for how, when we look at exploration technologies and how maybe we solve problems with fuels in tanks and fuel transfer between vehicles, they're all keying on that research. So I think it's a great platform, a multidisciplinary platform for one discipline to learn from another. And the fact that we make these discoveries and then can share them in this type of a community setting is a wonderful advantage of the space station.
Sure. So you mentioned climate, and that's my area of expertise, so I have to ask a follow-up question. So the International Space Station has played an important role in climate, both in observing the Earth, but also some of the experiments and technologies on there have benefits on Earth. So I'm curious from both of you what you see the role of the ISS in climate and Earth science, both in the past and going forward.
Yeah. So the ISS is a unique vantage point in space. It's low Earth orbit, so it's relatively close and gives us great advantage with cameras and technologies to be able to image the Earth's surface. The orbit is also shifting
Every orbit, we end up 15 degrees off from where we started. So it gives us the opportunity to start ferreting out diurnal effects on the Earth's climate, what time of day indications there are. And this is increasingly important for understanding this huge, complex question that is climate change and our Earth's response, both to human presence and natural systems going on. We've got several instruments on board, big instruments. We have 8 major external instruments looking at the Earth right now for Earth obs. We also have internal investigations going on like EarthCam and CEO, which give us the opportunity to zero in on particular goings-on the Earth and add that to the database. I think it's just amazing that we've been that type of platform to be able to host SMD research, to be able to host National Lab research, to be able to host interested private parties research coming out of that. And in the future, what I really hope for ISS is that people recognize it's a great place to test out technologies. Before you want to fly a larger free flyer vehicle that you really need to test out the technology first. ISS is a place you can do that and get your instrument back if you want to make changes on it before you fly it again. So it's proven as a great resource for being able to fly those instruments, to be able to cross-calibrate data coming in from free flyers while we fly on station, a similar type of instrument.
And that orbital inclination, it's not a challenge, it's a feature, to pull on another point that Mike Gold made this morning. You have the opportunity for those who are interested in sensor development to see the same spot on Earth from different lighting conditions. And that has led, and I think driven, the pace of discovery for understanding climate change. That's also led to improvements in sensor technology for tracking demographics, right? So as the climate of the Earth changes, we need to keep a close eye on agriculture and where we can grow crops sustainably and where we need to perhaps move those because of increases in water scarcity and food scarcity. So the International Space Station has been used as an observation platform for understanding not only changes in global climate, but also being able to track human populations and human agriculture. And it's going to play, I think, an important role in understanding how we can address climate change from a proactive viewpoint going forward. So in addition to those advances in sensor development, we're going to see, again, increases in the ability to fuse data from different platforms utilizing its unique capability to achieve observing in those areas different than what we see with fixed satellites.
That's it. And there's a really important role with climate, wanting to see different parts of the Earth at different times of day, so we really understand how things are changing is really important. Well, one of NASA's other big upcoming missions is Artemis 1, so the first in a series of increasingly complex missions to explore the moon in preparation for missions to Mars. And as we start thinking about long-duration spaceflight, how can ISS help us prepare for science on Artemis?
That's a great question, and it's one where ISS is really suited to help the efforts going forward in Artemis. First, let's focus a little bit on human research. As was stated earlier today, there are risks that we are still trying to close and countermeasures that we are striving to find that we can do through research on ISS. Certainly, some of the longer duration effects of spaceflight type of questions are still open. We're hoping to address that in the program with some longer duration missions eventually to get more data on one-year crew members to see if progression of the symptoms that occur during spaceflight continues to get worse or settles out over the course of a one-year mission. When we go to Mars and potentially beyond someday, those missions are looking longer than a year, so we need to be comfortable with those risks. We're also talking about the communication type of interactions, the psychological interactions for our crew members as they become more and more distant from Earth. So a lot of those studies are coming up, and human research is just booming on ISS now that we have 4 USOS crew members. We'll continue down that path and looking at these longer duration crew members. But we're also doing a lot of technology development on ISS. whether that's in our ECLIS or life support capabilities, testing out systems that we hope to either use on Gateway or the lunar habitat, and just from the science realm as well, we're looking at ISS as an ability to provide microgravity control samples for investigations that want to look at both combined microgravity and radiation effects as you leave Earth's magnetosphere. You want to understand what those impacts are. So it's a great opportunity to have a microgravity control like BioSentinel that you can fly on the station before you send it out on a distant mission.
Yeah.
And so International Space Station and Moon are near real-time communications. So you can still effectively problem solve by calling home and getting an answer and doing things. When we start thinking about going that next step to Mars, we're not going to have that capability. So a lot of the technologies in the area of life sciences, I spoke about tissue chips earlier, those are going to feed directly into human exploration of space beyond low Earth orbit. And I think they will be even more tested and more rigorous as part of the Artemis program and lunar exploration. So tissue chips will someday supplant the use of animal models for understanding the effects of toxic compounds or the safety and efficacy of drugs. We understand that we continue to have to use rodent models, for example, because they offer some unique advantages. But tissue chips offer the advantage not only of improving that because we're using human cells rather than another animal, plus we're getting away from the ethical concerns of using those other animals. But most importantly, they open the door for personalized medicine so that you'll be able to not only understand how an entire population might respond to a particular drug or an environmental effect, you can actually have your own cells put into a cell chip and understand how that affects your response to a particular set of therapeutics. So access to low Earth orbit, as we heard again, is going to be extremely important to continuing to enable the human exploration of space in those next steps. And in addition to the use of low Earth orbit, NASA, National Institutes of Health, and other government agencies are engaged in improving those tissue chip technologies to improve their longevity. And that's going to have direct benefits here on Earth to help accelerate the use of those tissue chips to supplant use of animal models.
So you mentioned, sort of transitioning. We have a decade of ISS research to come that we're really excited about. At the same time, we're starting to think about what comes next in these commercial LEO destinations. So what can you tell us about that transition from ISS to CLDs or commercial LEO destinations? Are there growth areas you see, changes in the way we do science, things we can think about in the next generation of orbiting laboratories?
You want to go first?
I'll start on that one. So it's, I would say first and foremost, it's extremely exciting because you're going to have a brand new set of eyes put on ways to conduct not only research and technology development in space, but ways to address the needs of multiple customers. So NASA will obviously continue to need access to low Earth orbit and will continue to need that access to continue its exploration goals. But each of these commercial LEO destination companies, the four, are going to be looking at ways to address different needs from different consumers out there. And choice in the consumer marketplace is a very important thing. So each of those companies is likely to take slightly different approaches to designing and operating their stations. And that's going to have, I think, an extremely beneficial value in both the venture capital community because someone is going to perhaps rely on a particular approach to manufacturing in space or supporting R&D in space or supporting private and sovereign astronaut missions that is different than their competitors in that space. So being able to have new eyes and new thoughts, new imagination brought to that forefront is extremely important. And obviously, as again you heard, public-private partnerships are going to be extremely critical to the continued success of that. So while there needs to be continued strong support from governments, we at National Lab and NASA and other agencies are also working towards that day when they are purely commercial driven so that the consumer will drive what's accessible in space and what's needed there. And that drives, I think, again, will drive acceleration in the pace of discovery in that environment.
Yeah, there are 3 decades of lessons learned about building equipment and facilities for ISS. And all of that knowledge gets to transition to the CLDs that are being built today. NASA's not dictating how that hardware is going to be built, but we do hope that you benefit from those lessons learned. Alternatively, we also have another 10 years to go at least, or another 8 years to go at least, of trying to figure out how to improve our facilities on ISS to enable the best science that we can do. So again, new forms of analytical research capabilities on board ISS, possibly some new facilities, maybe a furnace. We're looking at capabilities that we can enable on ISS, but with a mindset towards portability, the capability to move those onto CLDs in the future so that we can continue the NASA research and the National Lab research that takes advantage of those research facilities on the ISS in a future program.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I want to take some questions from the audience. So I think someone is going to read them out for us.
Right. All right, thank you. Yep, we have some questions from the app. So, Mike, going for you, what considerations go into selecting a research proposal for the National Lab? And then for Kurt, once those projects are selected and come in, what considerations does NASA have in terms of getting those manifested?
We want to do all the science all the time. Unfortunately, as you've heard, there are constraints on that. So we have a transparent review process, which is available on our website and go into more detail, but it essentially involves understanding the technical and scientific merit of an R&D project. If there is a mind towards producing a superior product in space, then there can also be, or there will also be, an economic review of the ability of that project to realize its stated goal in raising its technology readiness level or being able to improve a process in the microgravity environment. And as is always true, we also have to look at feasibility and the appropriateness of use of the International Space Station. So although we want to, we are unable to do all the science all the time, so we have to take a look at understanding, is the International Space Station the appropriate and best venue in order to conduct that research? If there is another research facility which is more easily accessible that can achieve the same scientific goals or technology development goals, we are going to direct those proposals to those facilities because they're going to be able to return more data in a shorter amount of time, and that therefore would not occupy precious resources that are available to other investigators.
Thanks, Mike. As Mike said, they're challenging us all the time to do all the research we possibly can. And it doesn't come just from the National Lab side, but all the other NASA sponsors as well. And when we get that information, we want to make it happen. But to do that, we work in partnership with them to go off and assess the feasibility of research investigations as they're proposed on the ISS. And we feed them that information back. If there are small fixes that can be done to make it work, we'll work with the sponsors to make sure that we can enable the research. Every once in a while it comes back and it's just not suited for the ISS, and we'll also tell the proposer that as well, because we want to, again, maximize the return value of the space station while we have it.
Yeah, thanks. More questions?
Okay. So the next question, so of the facilities that are available on station now, how much of those come from the commercial service providers? And then as we start to transition to the commercial LEO destinations, how will kind of common use hardware work in those cases? Things like glove boxes, microscopes, things of that nature.
Okay, I'll take a shot at that. Right now we've got, I believe, the benefits book that you guys might not have gotten in your bag, but they are at the NASA booth. Please, everyone, go get a copy. There are 20 commercial facilities that are on space station right now. That number varies a little bit based on whether or not they're sortie type facilities or permanent facilities. But they are there and they're being used. They're being used constantly. So as we transition to the next CLDs, for commercial facilities, we're really hoping that the CLD providers are looking at business-to-business relationships with those commercial providers, saying, hey, we can make this part of our facility. We know it's worked great for ISS over the years, and we really see it as a benefit for the facility. That type of conversion, we hope, drives this business-to-business engagement and the capability to help support those commercial facility providers into the next generation of space stations on orbit. Beyond that, we're always getting proposals for new facilities, and we're looking at those. We're dependent somewhat on the National Academy's decadal coming out next year to really understand where NASA wants to invest in those facility dollars. But we are looking for that information all the time. If you've got a proposal for a new facility or a new analytical capability on ISS, I'm always open to listening to those.
And I just contribute to that. Understand that the commercial sector has been involved in the development of platforms and facilities on the International Space Station from the beginning. And what we're seeing now is that they're actually not only designing and building those, they're operating those facilities as well. So there are a multitude of platforms outside the International Space Station and a multitude of facilities and platforms inside the International Space Station which are owned and operated by commercial developers. And again, that has led, I think, to an increase in the pace of capability improvements, and that pace of improvements only going to be accelerated again when we start to think about use of those facilities in space for manufacturing practices. So having the commercial sector involved in that is extremely important. And we all understand here on Earth, science has changed drastically. When I was a graduate student in the 90s, I could spend my entire graduate career sequencing one gene and had to do it in the laboratory and had to pour all the gels and I had to run all the gels and I had to read them. Now I can send a genome out and get the whole genome data back from a commercial vendor within a couple of days in some cases. And that same change is happening in the space environment. So there are models here on Earth for contract research organizations which I think would be applicable for the commercial LEO destinations in the future, where a user can go in and request a suite of services from different service providers, and they'll be able to identify and compare costs and quality of the data that's generated from each of those offered services going forward. And that is going to be, I think, again, another catalyst to help drive the pace of discovery in that environment.
Yeah, thanks. The pace of change in science is just so impressive. I think we have time for a couple more questions. Yeah.
Okay, I'll move over so you can actually see me.
Thank you.
Yeah. What is an example of a result which surprised you? Maybe challenged a previous theory that you had, or was a novel investigation which you hadn't considered in on the ISS?
My favorite theory was the one voiced by Ann Elk. Any fans of Monty Python out there? Her theory was that dinosaurs were big in the middle and skinny on either end. And I've seen no data from the International Space Station that would dispute that to date.
That wasn't the question.
Yeah, I think one of the investigations that certainly has sparked a lot of debate on the human research side is SANS and understanding what's behind space adaptation neuroocular syndrome. So this poses a real risk to our crew members. It's something that even after 30 years of spaceflight, we had not characterized this risk as of yet. And the desire to understand whether this is something that presents itself quickly or will be worsened over time is critical for us to understand as we go out further and further into the universe. That is again, one of those discoveries that has occurred over the course of the ISS development that was unexpected. And we're certainly looking forward to having more information and more data to be able to address that risk.
And if I could just add one short, just to give you a serious answer. Protein crystal growth, right? So we have exploited the absence of gravity in low Earth orbit for well over 35, 40 years now. And most of that research has been focused on making bigger, larger crystals. We now have the ability to do that at an industrial scale through the efforts of Redwire and the instrumentation they're flying. And we have pharmaceutical companies which are not only utilizing that advantage, the absence of gravity, to grow better crystals for imaging here on Earth. They're actually able to improve the formulation of monoclonal antibodies in that environment. And that I think is a new discovery. That hadn't occurred, I think, until Merck Pharmaceutical led some of that research. So everything that we learn in space, as with any experiment, is valuable, even the ones that don't work.
Yeah, that's an important point. We'll have time for one last question.
Okay. If it's permissible, there's a question for the moderator.
Oh, sure.
What, in this decade of results, what are you looking forward to potentially in climate science or anything else that the ISS could enable?
I'd just say in general with ISS, one of my favorite emails that I get every week is the highlights of ISS research. And I'm continually impressed by what we learn there and how gravity affects things in ways we may or may not predict in advance. So I look forward to that every week and learning there. From climate and earth science, you know, as we were talking about earlier, just the way that the ISS orbits gives us a unique information about that, and those instruments can all work together. So we just, Mike and I were a couple weeks ago at a launch of a commercial resupply launch that included an earth science observing instrument, one particularly looking at mineral dust. And you know, it's one of the uncertainties about climate is how much is mineral dust affecting the planet's temperature. And so we'll learn a lot from that, but we also can use that in combination with some of the other things we learned from ISS to get a better understanding of climate and earth science. And I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that as well. All right, with that, I'd like to thank Mike and Kurt. It's been a pleasure talking with you today, and I look forward to working with you more in the future. And so I'm going to pass this back to Patrick now.